रात को टूट गई तो क्या होगा, तो वो बोलता है वैसे आप नीचे सो जाओ, मैं ऊपर
आप भी नीचे सो जाओ।
So we are going live in 1 minute. 1 second.
Sir, we are alive. We are alive.
RPG Haldia is still not joined.
Sorry.
Haldia ji has not.
सर वो 11 बजे।
वो 11 बजे।
Okay.
12 बजे।
sorry.
वो 12 बजे।
Sorry. सतारा ब्रांच। Sorry.
ऊपर वाला सोचता है अगर रात को टूट गई तो क्या होगा, तो वो बोलता है वैसे आप नीचे सो जाओ।
Sorry sir.
So shall we start, sir?
Yes.
Good morning, all of the friends. Welcome to this IPCC direct tax lecture. So I hope आपके indirect tax के महेश गौर सर के lectures आपको बहुत ही पसंद आए हुए। तो डायरेक्ट टैक्स की लेक्चर्स भी वैसे ही इंटरेस्टिंग और मजेदार रहने वाली है। तो आप प्लीज लाइव रहिए और इंटरेक्टिव भी रहे। Now I request Arpit Kapraji, our regional council member and the person behind this whole success story of our crash course, without whom support it was very impossible to do this successfully. So over to you, Arpit sir.
Good morning, everyone. All the students. What a lovely day to start off. And when it has to start off with direct tax, I think it cannot be better. All the respected branch chairmen, all the managing committee members, Rishikesh, Dhaval, Atulji, Surendraji, Ravish, hats off to you for doing a phenomenal task. We are training people, although knowing there is a huge limitation, but still we have managed to make sure that we provide that bridge between the students and the faculties, so that during these challenging times we can provide that little ray of hope, a ray of interaction, and make sure that these days are not dull for the students who have nothing to do except studying. So when you get a faculty, when you get a guide, when you get a mentor, it's always great and it's always good to hear from them, maybe get a perspective, maybe also try and see if there are anything conceptually wrong or something that what we've been thinking but not been able to arrive at a good conclusion. We could get that course correction done. Also, heartiest greetings to the faculty for today, C. Prachi Parekh, one of the finest faculties that I've known, a personal friend, and also a good guide and a mentor to so many students, and does that without any bias intentions. So anything that she would do probably would be in the best interest of all students. All the students out here, coming from same background that you all are now facing, all of us have become chartered accountants with the same kind of approach that you've taken today. Since because of this lockdown, the attempt has been extended. This extra time shouldn't be what I believe a disaster in the making for you. Because what happens is when you are prepared for a particular span of time to study, and if you get some more to do, you cannot do that alone. You cannot keep on doing that. Now that is where the tempo, and that is where the focus, and that is where your dedication would come into picture. I remember back in 2009, the same happened with us. There were general elections across India, and our attempt was moved from May to June. When we after our attempt, when we met so many students, all had only one thing to say, that it was an absolute disappointment to study again for 1 month, because we were already preparing for already 4 months straight away, but then extra 1 month is not always helpful. Now in your case, you know this pretty much in advance, so therefore this initiative that the branches have come together under Vikasa, and we have got Sikasa and Ikasa also together. What they have tried to do is try to give you an interaction. So make sure you take the most of these interactions, and while you are interacting, while you are on this platform, just focus on what is happening here. You'll also have to understand the limitation when we are doing it through technology, and that too live, the faculty will have to take care of not only 1, 2 or 10, but all the thousands of students that they're there. And all these students, सारे students सब अलग अलग उंगलियों के हिसाब से होते हैं, कोई भी एक स्टैंडर्ड नहीं हो सकता. तो एक फैकल्टी को सारे स्टूडेंट्स के जरूरत के हिसाब से अपना लेक्चर डिवाइस करना पड़ता है, अपनी स्ट्रैटेजी नई बनानी पड़ती है, और वो एक चैलेंजिंग होती है. सो कहीं पर ही अगर आपको लगे कि यार ये फैकल्टी तो बहुत स्लो जा रही है, कहीं पर ही आपको लगे कि यार ये तो मजा नहीं आ रहा है, ये बहुत ही अलग टेंजेंट पे हो रहा है, ये नहीं हो रहा है, मेरा उस समय आपका एक ही कहना है कि प्लीज स्टे टुगेदर, स्टे पुट, स्टे फोकस्ड, कीप योर फोकस एंड डिसिप्लिन along with the faculty. मान के चलिए जो भी होगा वो आपके लिए कुछ ना कुछ अच्छा ही होगा. And out of the entire span, if you can take away 5 or 10 good things, that is the best you can get out of a particular day. Another small thing, आप जब भी बैठे हैं, हो सकता है कि कोई ऐसी चीज अभी पढ़ाई जा रही है जो आप शायद ऑलरेडी स्ट्रांग हो उसमें. You need not put your time learning those things again. उस टाइम पे मैं आपको कहूंगा कि प्लीज आप अपने नोट्स अपने खुद के बनाएं, उसको सॉल्व करने की कोशिश करें, अननोन टेरिटरी में जाने की थोड़ी सी कोशिश करें, जो भी प्रॉब्लम्स हैं उसमें जाएं, उसको एक्सप्लोर करें, और फिर देखें कि कैन यू रियली कम आउट विद द कंक्लूजन. डायरेक्ट टैक्स इज द वन सिंगल एक्ट. इनकम टैक्स एक्ट इज द लार्जेस्ट, is an act which provides the largest practice to most of the practicing chartered accountants, because it contributes almost 30% of a P&L for an entity. आप वो सोच सकते हैं, when you do a structuring, when you do an engineering for saving 30% of the tax cost, it is the biggest benefit and biggest advantage that you can give to an entity. Now इस सोच से, इस अप्रोच से जब आप इनकम टैक्स एक्ट को देखेंगे, probably you will be able to understand. जब एग्जाम में आएंगे, so everything has a different interpretation in income tax act. When it comes to an act, every comma, every full stop, every and, every or, every proviso can give you a different meaning. तो यहाँ पर आपको इतना पेशेंस की जरूरत है कि जब फैकल्टीज को चीज पढ़ाए जा रहे हैं उसको आपको समझना है कि इसमें नेक्स्ट टर्न क्या हो सकता है, नेक्स्ट टर्न क्या हो सकता है. एंड व्हेन इट कम्स टू एग्जाम, एक चीज आप डायरेक्ट टैक्स में हमेशा ध्यान रखिए, जो भी आपके पेपर में आ रहा है, दैट इज एन एब्सोल्यूट थ्योरी, दैट इज नॉट अ क्वेश्चन. Always try and convert that theory first into a question. Only then you will be able to answer. हमेशा एक चीज बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, कोई भी एक्ट हो, कोई भी लॉ हो, आप जो भी पढ़ रहे हैं, क्योंकि क्वेश्चन जो पेपर में जो आ रहा है, दैट इज अ सिनेरियो, दैट इज अ थ्योरी, दैट इज अ पर्टिकुलर issue that has been created for you to solve. Now in order to solve, you'll have to first convert it into question and then try and see. और ये हर एक फैकल्टी करता है, आपको सिर्फ फोकस करना है और आइडेंटिफाई करना है कि वो कैसे कर रहा है. So I think with these limited words, it's amazing. I really congratulate all the branches. I congratulate all the students for doing a fantastic job. आप लोग का साथ जब रहता है तभी encouragement मिलता है कि we could do more and more, we could go beyond. और आज फैकल्टी जो कि एक सिर्फ दीवार को देख के बोल रहा है, उसको कैसे मालूम पड़ता है कि what is the encouragement अगर वो एक भी ऑडियंस को नहीं देख पाता है. So it is your internal vibes जब आप पढ़ रहे हो, and if you're feeling good about what you're reading, I think that automatically converts a faculty to do more and more and better. So make sure you're doing that for each and every faculty, so that indirectly आपको ही उसका फायदा मिले and they can do a best job. Also stay put, stay disciplined. थोड़े बहुत टेक्निकल ग्लिच हो सकते हैं, थोड़े बहुत कुछ और हो सकते हैं. We are all using this technology. We are all human beings. There is always scope for improvement. Do let us know if we have to improve in any scenario. We are always there. Entire WIRC, entire Vikasa is committed to deliver the best to you. Any feedback, any suggestions that you need, you can always reach out to me, or you can reach out to any of the wonderful people, all the branch managers who are up from 7 o'clock in the morning to ensure that this, whatever we do today, goes on smoothly. I'm sure you had a great time with indirect taxes. You'll have a lovely time with direct taxes. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy. Stay safe. Take care of everyone around you and study well. Prepare well. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Rishikesh.
Thank you, Arpit sir. Now I request CA Atul Agarwal sir, CICASA chairman, to have a few words and have an opening address. Over to Atul sir.
Thank you, Rishikesh ji. Thank you, Arpit Kabra ji, Surendra Lanawat ji, Dhaval ji, and Ravish ji from Lucknow. And thank you, Prachi Parekh ji, the faculty of the today's session. I welcome to all the students who are present here today for this crash course. I hope all the students are from IPCC, and today we are going to start the session related to direct taxes. Friends, as RPG rightly said, that the direct taxes is a subject like which is very important in the day-to-day life of a chartered accountant, and 30% of the 30% of the work is especially from the direct taxes. And RPG, who is a learned faculty in the direct tax, I believe you will all learn a lot from the direct taxes. I would like to simply say one thing. Whenever we go to write an exam, especially in a taxes, either it is direct tax or indirect tax, even a comma and a full stop changes the answer of the question which the institute is asking for. I can give you a very simple example. Let's say there is a question related to salary. Now, if the question is, in examination, if the question is defined salary under Section 16 of the Income Tax Act 1961, then definitely it doesn't mean that lots of items which are there which you can put into the salary. And if you read the act, it starts from salary means. Now, when we talk about salary means, there are certain items, and only these items are a part and parcel of salary. Of what most of the time students are doing, they try to add so many things from their own side, that meaning thereby that you are actually not aware about what is the definition of salary. So income tax is really, direct tax is really a subject where you can score well. You can complete your degree also, because the rest of the papers, like especially we talk about costing, we talk about auditing, they may not be by scoring papers. But yes, direct tax is a paper which can give you a good score. And important thing is, whatever is written in the law, that is the only answer. You cannot add anything from your own side. You cannot delete anything from your own side. So you have to be very specific while you give the answer of any question which is in the examination paper. You have to be very specific what is written in the law, that only you have to take care. It is well said by Arpit ji that whosoever has completed that particular topic which the faculty is going to brief you, you may devote time to explore more and more questions. I can add one thing here, like it is said, it is an opportunity to clear your all doubts here, because it's a crash course, and the purpose of the crash course is what all doubts you have, like you might be studying since last 2-3 months, and during that particular time you must have noticed certain difficulties. I'm sure it may be the right platform to solve your all difficulties, and I'm sure this crash course is going to be very much helpful to all the students who are there, who are watching, who are doing this crash course. I'm really grateful to Rishikesh ji, who took this opportunity and who gave us an opportunity, even the branches of the CIRC. I can assure you on behalf of the Board of Studies, like Board of Studies is committed to all the students. They should not have any kind of fear. If they have any kind of problem, they can approach the Board of Studies directly also. And one more thing I would like to add, in Board of Studies, I request all the students, you should get registered with the portal of Students Portal of Board of Studies. Apart from the crash course which you are doing now, you might be having lots of audio and video lectures there. So if you have any doubt on any particular topic or a subject, you can go through with that lecture also, and what all your queries are there, you can write to the Board of Studies. I'm sure that will be helpful to all of you. With these words, I'm handing over the charge to Rishikesh ji for starting this session. Rishikesh ji, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Atul ji, for your wonderful opening remark. Now I request our Prachi ma'am, who is very experienced faculty. She's been working, teaching since 10 years in direct taxes. She's been professional also. And now, without taking your much time, now I request CA Prachi ma'am to start the session. Thank you, Prachi ma'am, and thank you, Atul sir, for wonderful remarks. Thank you, all the dignitaries. Thank you, Arpit sir. Bye.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. all the respected office bearers of the various branches of the institute. I thank all of you to give me this wonderful opportunity to make some constructive use of the time that we are all forced to be in, the lockdown and all. And to all the students who are watching these series of lectures, I'm sure they are going to benefit you. And I request all of you to make the most of these. Can I start the session, Rishikesh ji? Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Fine. So without taking any much time of the students, I would say, let us begin with today's session. So like we said, we'd be doing a revision of the direct tax curriculum for the CA intern and CA IPCC students. So what I intend to cover in this span of 8 or 9 days that we have at our disposal is we'd be doing an in detail coverage of all the important chapters from the IPCC or inter perspective. So we'll be covering all the heads of income in detail. We'll be looking at all the various amendments that have come out as a result of Finance Act 2019. And of course, we'll be looking at few smaller concepts from the curriculum like residential status, etc. Now, if we have the notes that we are going to refer to, like I said earlier in the earlier meeting that we had, would be the institute's material. First and foremost, it will be all easily available to all of us. And nextly, it's really updated and it is a very, I would say, up to the mark material that we can use for referring for our exams. Secondly, there are some small PPT presentations that I have made for revising every chapter. Now, as and how I take up a particular chapter during the course of our sessions, I would be sharing screen on this app for that particular chapters. And then at the end of the session, those presentations would be made available to you. I would be mailing them to the respective branch office bearers here, and they can then do the needful. So this is going to be the flow and the manner in which these lectures are going to take place. Now let us start just like Arpit mentioned that it is very difficult to gauge whether people are understanding or not, but I'm sure we'll have positive vibes all throughout the 3 hours that we are going to spend together, so that I at least get some level of comfort, okay, that what I am trying to put across is taken in by most of the people listening to me. So direct tax, yes, it is certainly not a very easy subject, I would say, but yes, I could be biased about it. It is definitely an interesting subject. And at the inter level that we are in, the foundation of this subject is being laid. So coming to the subject as such, direct tax is basically a revenue law and it is a central levy. So by facilitating or by enacting this law, the center is in a position to collect taxes from all of us. It is a very lengthy act. It has more than approximately 298 sections spread across various number of chapters. Of course, that is not all that we have in our curriculum. So luckily so for the CA inter level. Now let us come to something very interesting about a revenue law. So if you look at all the provisions of the Income Tax Act, they are divided into two broad categories. There's something called as a machinery provision and there's something called as a charging section. I'm sure most of us would be knowing this logic. So if I talk of section 15, or section 17, or if I talk of section 22, so these are all charging sections of the respective head of income. What is the function of these sections is that they help us understand what exactly is the amount or the income which is going to be charged to tax under this head. And then we have certain machinery provisions. For example, all the provisions henceforth, like if I talk of income from salary, section 17 is the charging section. And then 17.3 and all gives me the manner of computation of various perquisites, and section 10 puts in the computation of allowances. So all those are enabling provisions, which are the machinery provisions. Similarly, when we talk of income from house property, section 22 is the charging provision. And then we have the computational provisions for section 23 and onwards. Now, this is a very important feature about any revenue law, that the machinery provisions and the charging provisions have to coexist. If at all there is an absence of any one of these provisions, then the law cannot be in a position to collect the revenue. So if the machinery provision fails, then we would say that there is no mechanism to work out as to how that amount is to be calculated on which the tax is to be levied. I can just give you a small example. We all use mobile phones these days. Supposing there is no battery or there is some network issue in my mobile phone, I cannot make a call. At the same time, supposing I don't have enough balance in my prepaid mobile connection, still I cannot make a call. So in this situation, just like to make one complete call, we need both the money and the infrastructure to be in place. Similarly, for any revenue law, be it direct taxes or indirect taxes, for that revenue law to function well, we need both. We need the charging provision and we also need the machinery provision. There are going to be one or two instances during the course of these lectures where I'll be pointing out specific situations wherein the machinery provisions are absent and the charging provisions are there, and therefore we say that we are not in a position to levy taxes. So this was just a brief. Coming to what we are going to cover today. So what I have in mind is this being the first session, let us begin with a small simple head of income. So I would be revising income from house property for today's session. There are certain questions which I have identified from the Institute's module, which we'll also be discussing and taking them up. Apart from that, let us see how the session progresses, and if some time permits, we might be looking at rates of taxes and all, which have there have been slight amendments as regards that. So that is what I have in store today. I would be sharing screen for my presentation, which has been made on that topic, and so that can benefit most of the students viewing this. Now coming to our flow, which we are going to take. So if I pick up income from house property today, we would first be going through what amendments have come in this particular head of income as a result of Finance Act 2019, and then we would be understanding the chapter in detail. Before I begin with my presentation, let us all just revise the assessment year and the previous year relevant for our attempt. So we are studying the Income Tax Act 1961 as amended by Finance Act 2019. Also, for all of you must be aware, Finance Act 2019. So there have been amendments in 3 stages in this particular year, 2019. So we first had the interim budget which came in. Then we had the full-fledged budget which came in July, and then we had the ordinance which came in October. So what we are going to be revising is going to be a result of all these 3 changes. The previous year relevant for our attempt is previous year 1920, assessment year 2021. There are 5 heads of income: income from salaries, income from house property, profits and gains of business or profession, capital gains, and income from other sources. Today, we are beginning with revising income from house property. I'll just share my presentation on screen here. Just give me some few seconds. Is the screen visible, Rishikesh ji? Okay. Income from house property is our agenda for the day. This is chapter 4C of the Income Tax Act, and it encompasses sections from section 22 to section 27. That is the ambit of sections we are going to cover today. Let us have a quick look at the amendments that have come in, just to revise them at the beginning of the session. And then we would be discussing these amendments as and when we go to the respective sections. So the first amendment that came under income from house property is the benefit of self-occupied properties is now going to be allowed in respect of 2 properties. So we have been used to the fact that only one property could be claimed as a self-occupied property and all the other properties owned by the SSC are to be treated as deemed to be let out properties. The first amendment that we are going to remember over here is the benefit of self-occupied properties is now extended in respect of any two properties which are owned by the assessee and occupied for the purpose of his residence. The second amendment here is in respect of those assessees who are holding property as stock in trade. So the earlier scenario was such that if at all there is any unsold stock lying with these assessees who are holding this property as stock in trade, so we are talking basically of the developers over here, then they were given a period of 1 year from the end of the financial year in which the completion certificate was obtained. So that for that period of 1 year, the annual value of such property was taken to be nil. This property used to be treated as DLOP after the expiry of 1 year from that end of financial year. There's a small relief provided to these kind of SSCs, and the amendment now says that for a period of 2 years from the end of the financial year in which this certificate is obtained, the annual value of that property can be taken as nil. Thereafter, it is to be treated as DLOP. I'm repeating again, we are just looking at these amendments a glance through. We would be discussing all these amendments in detail as and how we come to the respective section. Also, despite the benefit of self-occupied properties being extended to two properties, the interest deduction has been kept same at 2 lakhs. So we do not have a separate deduction in respect of interest for each of the self-occupied properties, but the maximum amount has been now restricted to 2 lakhs, what was even earlier available in respect of one property. So these are the 3 important amendments we are going to keep in mind when we revise this chapter again before our exams. Now coming to the chapter in detail. Let us understand the charging section of this head of income, what it says. So it says the annual value of any property which is comprising of building or land appurtenant thereto. So there is typically a property. Now the meaning of the term property is very wide. It is not defined in the Income Tax Act. But when we are looking at this particular head of income, we have to restrict our meaning of property to imply either a building or a land which is attached to or appurtenant to the building. So annual value of this kind of property, which is owned by the assessee, or I can say in technical terms of which assessee is the owner, is chargeable to tax under the head income from house property. So what we should immediately remember here is it is not the rent which we are deriving which is directly taxable. What is taxable under this head of income is the annual value of that particular property. So like I said, what is taxable is the annual value. What are the properties covered here? So it could be a building or it could be a land which is attached to a building. So that brings up a question. Is only land covered under this particular head of income? So obviously the answer is no. Land is in isolation is not covered under this particular head of income. Any land which is attached to or appurtenant to the building is going to be covered. Naturally, one of the important conditions which came out from the charging section is that assessee should be the owner of the property. So let us analyze the components of the charging section. The term property, like I said, it has a wide meaning. So, shares, jewelry, any other kind of assets that you have which have some value, all can come within the meaning of the term property. But when we talk of section 22, the meaning of the term property has to be restricted to building and land appurtenant thereto. What kind of properties would be included when I talk of this particular head of income? So this is something which we can get an answer of when we look all around us. So the query here is, will properties include only residential properties or they will include commercial properties as well? So you can look at some examples wherein there are certain shops or there are those big shops in malls or apna local baniye ka dukaan and all that. When that is given on rent, they are typically commercial properties. So when an owner of this property is receiving some rent from letting out of these properties, that rent is also included under the head income from house property. So even if the heading is income from house property, any rent which is derived from letting out of a commercial property is also included in this particular head of income. The next question which comes before us as a poser is whether rental income from a vacant plot of land would be charged under this head. So my answer is no, because what is covered in the term property for this head of income is only building and any land which is appurtenant to this building. So if at all there is a vacant plot of land which is given on lease or rent, the rent which is derived from that particular plot of land will be taxable under income from other sources and not under income from house property. One of the conditions of the charging section was assessee should be the owner of the property, like we mentioned. So can there be a scenario where I'm earning income from a house property even if I am not the owner? To give you an example, suppose there is a property which is owned by Mr. A. I have taken that property on rent from Mr. A. It is a huge property comprising of, let us say, 2 floors. Now I do not require that big property for my own use. So I just decide that I will be letting out the ground floor to another person, let us say Mr. C. Of course, after taking due permission from Mr. A. So what is the scenario here? The owner of the property is Mr. A. I have taken that property on rent from Mr. A. I am paying him some rent. I have further sublet a part of the property to one Mr. C, who is also paying me rent. So there are 2 rents which are being received on account of this property. One is received by Mr. A from me, and I am receiving some rent from Mr. C. Now the question here is, even if I am not the owner, I am in a position to receive rent. So would this rent income be charged to tax in my hands under income from house property? So the answer is no, because the charging section very specifically mentions that for a particular assessee to be charged under this head of income in respect of the rent which he derives, he should be the owner of the property. Now, despite the fact that I'm deriving some rent from the letting out of this property, I am still not the owner because the ownership of this property is with Mr. A. In that event, the rental income which I receive from subletting of this particular property is going to be taxed under income from other sources because I am not fulfilling one of the qualifying conditions of section 22. Now, most of you would be probably feeling, why are we going into so much detail if we have not gone earlier? Just to remind you, our paper pattern for this particular subject comprises of 70 marks, which are the comprehensive questions, and 30 marks from the MCQ aspect. Now, when we look at the MCQ aspect, you can have some case study like MCQs or maybe some scenario based questions which may be appearing in our examination. So all these smaller detailing which we are doing is going to help us to be updated and relevant if at all we come across these kind of MCQs in the course of attempting our paper. So I request all of you to pay attention even to the small detail which are being shared here or which are being discussed, because we really don't know what can really come up as an MCQ in our examination. So these were a few aspects about the chargeability and the section 22 which relates to the charge of this particular head of income. I would again repeat here, it is not the rental income which is charged under this head, but the annual value. So that then comes up to the next part which we are going to revise, at what exactly comprises of the annual value of a property. We're going to look at that in the coming slides. Till then, let us remember that the rental income which is actually derived by the assessee is going to be a very important factor in deriving the annual value which is to be computed. Before we move on to the formula for understanding the gross annual value, there is one small thing about the charging section which we should take note of. We should always remember the exclusion. And the exclusion in this case is, if there is any property which is occupied by the assessee for the purpose of his or her business or profession, then that particular property which is occupied for the purpose of business or profession, profits from which are chargeable to tax have to be excluded from the property, meaning covered under this particular head of income. So any such property which is occupied by the assessee for the purpose of his business or profession, profits from which are chargeable to tax is not chargeable to tax under this particular head. To give you an example, suppose I have a small office from which I am carrying out my profession, or let us say I am running my tuition classes. So that particular property is being used by me for the purpose of my business or profession. And whatever I'm earning out of that business or profession, I am paying tax on the same under the head PGB. So that particular property which I'm using to carry out my profession or business is not to be included under the chapter income from house property. So annual value of this particular property is going to be excluded when I'm computing my income from house property. So this is the small exclusion we should take care of. Going further, all these slides which I'm using in the course of my revision lectures will be made available to you at the end of the lecture. So anybody who's desperately writing down things, please don't do that. Please focus on understanding the concepts here.
Ma'am,
yes, sir.
One query is there.
Okay.
Should we take it now or should we take it afterwards?
So what I suggest, Rishikesh sir, is we are at 8:30 right now, correct?
Yeah.
Let me continue maybe till 9:15, 9:30. Then we take a 15-minute breather wherein we can address the queries which we received till then and then continue with the lecture.
Yeah. Then you can see your YouTube chat. Live chat.
In that, the queries would be popping up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
The queries which we received till then and then. Okay. So all of you who are having any questions or so, what we have decided is let the lecture progress for another 40-45 minutes. Then we take a small 10-15 minute break wherein we can look at all the queries that have come up. Because if I keep addressing queries in between, it would break the flow. And for the others who don't have any query as such, they would be bothered by the disruption. I hope that really suits all of us. Yes, so going further. Okay. So yes, this is the exclusion. I can see one message which says, ma'am, slow. So I just revise what we have done till now. So we are just looking at what kind of properties are included under this particular head, income from house property. One conclusion which we all derived was even rental income from commercial property is chargeable to tax under this particular head of income. Another thing here is it is not the rental income which is charged to tax, but the annual value of any building or building with land appurtenant thereto which is chargeable to tax. Any rent which is derived from a vacant plot of land is to be charged under income from other sources. It is not a part and parcel of income from house property. So these are the basic things which we have looked at till now, apart from the 3 amendments. For any of you who did not really catch up on what the amendments were, that was just a glance. We would be discussing the 3 amendments that have happened under this particular chapter in detail as and when we come to that particular section in the course of our revision. Okay. Moving further. So before we go on to the formula for calculating the gross annual value, let us try and divide the properties into 3 categories, which comes out as a result of the content of this particular chapter. So the properties which we are talking of under this head of income can be divided under 3 categories. First is let out properties. So let out properties are typically those properties which are given on rent. So they are commercially let out. You don't occupy them for your residence or your own business or any other activity. The second category of property is self-occupied property or unoccupied properties. So this is an example wherein either the assessee is living in that particular property, or for certain reasons he is not able to occupy the property. The third category is a deemed to be let out property. So deemed to be let out property is typically a self-occupied property which is going beyond the permissible limits of properties which are permitted as SOPs, and it is lying vacant, or the assessee is having multiple self-occupation properties, and that is why we have to classify few of them as deemed to be let out. So let out property में क्या होता है, यहाँ पर ये property actually let out की गई है. हम यहाँ पर the assessee doesn't stay here, वो खुद वहाँ पे रह नहीं रहा है, उसने वो property rent पे दी हुई है, उसको every year he receives some rent from letting out of those properties. Second category are those properties which are actually being self-occupied. तो मैं खुद वो property में रह रही हूँ, या फिर मैं वो प्रॉपर्टी में रह नहीं पा रही हूँ फॉर सम रीजन, बट मैंने उसको कमर्शियली एक्सप्लॉइट नहीं किया है, मैंने उसको किराए पे नहीं दिया है. दैट इज द सेकंड कैटेगरी व्हिच इज अ सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाइड प्रॉपर्टी और आल्सो एन अनऑक्यूपाइड प्रॉपर्टी. एंड द थर्ड कैटेगरी ऑफ प्रॉपर्टीज आर डीम्ड टू बी लेट आउट प्रॉपर्टीज. So when we have more than the specified number of properties as self-occupied properties, the other properties would then be classified as deemed to be let out properties. So these are broadly the three categories of properties that we can divide our entire chapter into. Coming to the format. So IFHP, IFS, that is income from house property and income from salaries, are typically format chapters. यहाँ पर अगर आपको किसी चीज का कैलकुलेशन करना है, जैसे टैक्सेबल इनकम डिराइव करना है, तो नेसेसरीली आप लोगों को एक फॉर्मेट को स्टिक करना है. ये फॉर्मेट को आप अच्छे से याद कर लीजिए, मेमोराइज कर लीजिए. जो भी एग्जाम में क्वेश्चंस आते हैं उनमें जो डिटेल्स दिए गए हैं उन्हें इन फॉर्मेट में प्लॉट कर दीजिए, तो आप लोगों को आसानी होगी when you are solving the question. So this is typically the format in which we approach a question which is coming out from this head of income. The format begins from gross annual value. Each of the terms that are here, like gross annual value, standard deduction, net annual value, we would be understanding each of them in detail. पहले हम ये format को अच्छे से समझ लेते हैं. Gross annual value is what we derive as a result of few computations which I'm going to do in the coming slides. From the gross annual value, we reduce property taxes or municipal taxes which are paid to the local authority and which are borne by the owner. So जो भी खर्चा owner ने किया है on account of municipal taxes which are paid to the local authority, those will be reduced from this particular gross annual value. Then we would be left with the net annual value. From the net annual value, we have two deductions. One is called the standard deduction, or it is also called as the ad hoc deduction, which is at 30% of the net annual value. The second deduction is on account of interest on loans. After we reduce these two amounts from the net annual value, what we would be left with is income from house property. So again, let's do a quick revision of the format. We begin our computation with the gross annual value. From the gross annual value, we reduce property taxes or municipal taxes paid to the local authority and borne by the owner. Then we arrive at the net annual value. From the net annual value, we make two deductions, which are first, which is the standard deduction or the ad hoc deduction, which is at 30% of the net annual value. And second is on account of interest on loans. After these two deductions are made, what we are left with is income from house property. Let us understand what exactly is the gross annual value. So gross annual value, the first component that we are going to calculate is the reasonable expected rent. Reasonable expected rent is also called as annual lettable value. Wherever you people have studied this chapter or even in our study material, you can find use of the word ER. ER is expected rent. We can also call it as reasonable expected rent. It is also called as annual lettable value. So in finding out what the gross annual value is, the first and foremost step that we have to do is find out the reasonable expected rent. To understand how to calculate the reasonable expected rent, we need to know three things. First is the municipal value, second is the fair rent, and third is the standard rent. Now coming to the first parameter, what is municipal value? So municipal value is typically the value which is assigned to a particular property by the local authority or the municipal corporation for the purpose of levy of municipal taxes. Right? रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट ढूंढने में हमें तीन पैरामीटर्स का ध्यान रखना है. सबसे पहला पैरामीटर है म्युनिसिपल वैल्यू, दूसरा पैरामीटर है फेयर रेंट एंड तीसरा पैरामीटर है स्टैंडर्ड रेंट. So what is the first parameter, which is municipal value? So municipal value is basically the value which is fixed by the municipal authorities for the purpose of levy of municipal taxes. The second parameter here is fair rent. What is fair rent? So fair rent का ऐसा कोई standard amount नहीं होता है. Fair rent is the amount which is fixed by the market forces of demand and supply. जैसे कोई हाई फाई लोकेलिटी में जहां पर बहुत ज्यादा डिमांड है प्रॉपर्टी का, जैसे मुंबई की बात करें तो टाउन साइड या साउथ बॉम्बे जिसे कहते हैं, वहां पर अक्सर लोगों को ज्यादा डिमांड होता है, तो वहां पर रेंट जो है वो थोड़ा ज्यादा हाई होता है. अगर हम सबर्ब्स की तरफ जाते हैं, थोड़ा ऐसे एरियाज में जाते हैं जहां कनेक्टिविटी वीक है या जो थोड़े दूर हो जाते हैं, वहां पर जो नॉर्मल रेंट होता है वो स्लाइटली ऑन द लोअर साइड होता है. So fair rent is a parameter which is fixed by the market forces of demand and supply. That is the second aspect which we are going to keep in mind when we are deriving the reasonable expected rent. The third parameter is standard rent. Standard rent जो होता है वो जहां जहां पर रेंट कंट्रोल एक्ट लेवीड है, इट इज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर एक्ट. जरूरी नहीं है हर एक क्वेश्चन में ये अमाउंट दिया गया हो. अगर किसी पर्टिकुलर क्वेश्चन में हमें डिटेल्स दी गई है स्टैंडर्ड रेंट की तो हमें उन्हें यूज करनी है. अगर किसी पर्टिकुलर क्वेश्चन में स्टैंडर्ड रेंट के ऊपर हम साइलेंट है, कुछ बोला नहीं गया है, तो हम ये मान लेंगे कि वो पर्टिकुलर प्रॉपर्टी के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में स्टैंडर्ड रेंट एप्लीकेबल नहीं है. So municipal value, fair rent and standard rent are the three parameters which we will keep in mind while computing the reasonable expected rent. So what is reasonable expected rent or annual lettable value or expected rent? So it is given by the following formula which we have here. It is municipal value and fair rent, higher of these two subject to standard rent. So हमें इसको याद कैसे करना है? Reasonable expected rent is municipal value and fair rent, higher of 1 and 2, subject to lower of standard rent. To give you a few examples, I have just plotted some figures here. काफी easy लग सकता है आपको ये, but for the benefit of others who might need some help with understanding this, let us go through it. So first situation, my municipal value is 100, my fair rent is 120. Higher of 1 and 2 is 120. I have standard rent applicable for this particular property which comes to 200. Therefore, my reasonable expected rent is higher of municipal value and fair rent which is 120 subject to standard rent. So since in this case my standard rent is more than higher of 1 and 2, my reasonable expected rent will be 120 which is low. Coming to another small quick illustration we can go through. Say my municipal value in a particular case is 100, my fair rent is 120. So higher of 1 and 2 is 120. My standard rent is 90. So I have to subject my higher of 1 and 2 to lower of standard rent, and therefore in this second illustration my reasonable expected rent comes to 90. Third illustration which we have here. In the third illustration, my municipal value is 100. My fair rent is 80. Higher of 1 and 2 comes to 100. Standard rent is 120. Reasonable expected rent is again lower of higher of this 2 and standard rent, which comes to 100. The last illustration which we take up, municipal value is 100, fair rent is 100. Higher of the two यहाँ पर कुछ नहीं है, 100 ही हो जाएगा, दोनों same है. Standard rent in this case is 95. So of course my RER will be subject to lower of the two, which is 95. जहां पर जो लोग सुन रहे हैं, why is my standard rent, why is my RER restricted to my standard rent in case my standard rent is lower than these two parameters? The reason here is income tax always is paying attention to what has been put out by the other law. यहाँ पर एक लॉजिक इन्वॉल्व है. सो अगर मुझे पता है कि मेरा रेंट कंट्रोल एक्ट बता रहा है कि आप एक पर्टिकुलर जुरिस्डिक्शन या पर्टिकुलर एरिया में 90 से ज्यादा स्टैंडर्ड रेंट चार्ज नहीं कर सकते, डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट कि वहां की फेयर रेंट समझो 120 है, इनकम टैक्स स्टैंडर्ड रेंट एज गिवन बाय द रेंट कंट्रोल एक्ट को रिस्पेक्ट करता है एंड वो अपने कंप्यूटेशन में आरईआर को रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर देता है एट 90. Now what is basically the RER? RER, like I said, उसका नाम ही उसका मीनिंग समझाता है आपको. RER is the reasonable expected rent. तो जब मैं कोई प्रॉपर्टी ओन करती हूँ, ये मिनिमम रेंट है जो मैं एस्टिमेट करती हूँ कि मुझे इस प्रॉपर्टी से रिसीव होगा. तो जैसे समझो मैं मुंबई में कोई प्रॉपर्टी ओन कर रही हूँ, लेट अस से इन माहिम और दादर, तो मुझे पता है कि अगर ये प्रॉपर्टी को मैं लेट आउट करूंगी तो टिपिकली मुझे समझिए एक 75 से 80,000 पर मंथ के रेंज में रेंट रिसीव करना चाहिए. सो इनकम टैक्स एक्ट ने अपना एक एक्सपेक्टेशन बना रखा है कि हमें ये इतना अमाउंट इस प्रॉपर्टी से एस्टिमेटेड है. ये करने की वजह क्या है? अगर असेसी इससे कम चार्ज कर रहा है, जैसे समझो मैंने कहा कि मेरा एक्सपेक्टेशन इस प्रॉपर्टी में से है कि मैं 75,000 का रेंट एक्सपेक्ट करती हूँ, लेकिन असेसी समझो 50,000 ही रिसीव कर रहा है. तो यहाँ पर एक क्वेश्चन क्रिएट होता है कि असेसी कम क्यों रिसीव कर रहा है. इज इट द सिनेरियो दैट ही इज रिसीविंग द अदर अमाउंट इन सम अदर वे, जैसे मे बी कैश में रिसीव कर रहा हो या समथिंग एल्स, एंड इट इज एस्केपिंग टैक्सेशन? That is why इनकम टैक्स ने ये एस्टिमेट बना रखा है कि ये रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट का फिगर है. So this is how we will calculate the first parameter in our GAV computation, which was the reasonable expected rent, by using these things: municipal value, fair rent, higher of the two, subject to standard rent, and that gives me my reasonable expected rent. Assuming that we are comfortable with this part and with all the 4 illustrations which I have put up on the slide, we will move on to the next aspect of computation of gross annual value. So second aspect here is actual rent received or receivable. Now this is that amount which is actually received by the assessee. So yeah, receivable. यहाँ पर the word receivable has very important function. So मुझे अगर कोई rent for the period due है, but मैंने अभी तक उसको receive नहीं किया है, still that will be included in this particular amount. तो जैसे समझो typically मेरा 12 months का rent अगर हम बात करते हैं, usually 11 months के contract होते हैं, तो वो period में से समझो 5 months का rent जो है वो ड्यू है, अभी तक मुझे रिसीव नहीं हुआ है, स्टिल आई एम गोइंग टू इंक्लूड इट इन दिस पर्टिकुलर कंप्यूटेशन व्हिच इज एक्चुअल रेंट रिसीव्ड और रिसीवेबल. सो ग्रॉस एनुअल वैल्यू में फर्स्ट पार्ट ए वाज रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट, सेकंड पार्ट इज एक्चुअल रेंट रिसीव्ड और रिसीवेबल. नाउ व्हाट इज माय ग्रॉस एनुअल वैल्यू हियर? इट इज हायर ऑफ रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट और एक्चुअल रेंट रिसीव्ड और रिसीवेबल. तो जैसे मैंने कहा कि एक एक्सपेक्टेशन है हमारी प्रॉपर्टी से एंड दूसरा है जो हमने एक्चुअली रिसीव किया है. हायर ऑफ दिस टू इज गोइंग टू बी माय ग्रॉस एनुअल वैल्यू. लेट अस टॉक अबाउट दिस इन द फॉर्म ऑफ एन एग्जांपल व्हिच आई जस्ट मेंशन्ड सम टाइम बैक. लेट अस टेक इट फर्दर. सपोज आई हैव अ प्रॉपर्टी लोकेटेड इन दादर and the expectation from that particular property is that I am going to receive a rent of say 75,000 rupees per month, as against which I am actually receiving a rent of 50,000 rupees per month. what happens is my gross annual value is, like I have put up here on the slide, it is higher of reasonable expected rent and actual rent. So यहाँ पर 75,000 की मेरी RER है या मेरा expectation है and 50,000 का मेरा actual rent है. So higher of the two. So 75,000 rupees per month is the amount on which I'm going to pay tax. So this ensures that even though the assessee is undercharging the rent, उसने शायद कुछ rent कम receive किया हो, इसके बावजूद वो tax ज़्यादा amount पर दे, so that income tax को कुछ नुकसान ना हो, जितना कि उन्होंने decide किया है expectation होगा, उतना amount वो amount पे वो tax receive कर ले. So this is the formula for gross annual value as of now. I will just quickly do a recap. Gross annual value is firstly reasonable expected rent, which is municipal value, fair rent, higher of 1 and 2, subject to standard rent, and my RER is of course lower of this. My gross annual value is then reasonable expected rent or actual rent received or receivable, higher of the two. Going further, we'll just do some small illustration to find out what the gross annual value is. So in a particular example, my municipal value is 400. My fair rent is 500. Higher of the two is 500. Standard rent in that particular area is 200. RER is 200 because it is lower of the two. Let us say my actual rent received or receivable in this particular case is 600. So my gross annual value here is going to be 600. Okay. Coming to the next illustration, suppose my municipal value is 90, my fair rent is 90, higher of 1 and 2 is 90, standard rent is 100. I will then restrict it to my RER to my standard rent, which is 90. Let us say in this illustration, my actual rent received or receivable is 80. अभी आप यहाँ पर देख रहे हैं कि मेरा reasonable expected rent जो है वो 90 है and जो actually मैंने earn किया है वो 80 है, despite the fact my gross annual value is going to be 90. Coming to the third quick illustration, my municipal value is 350, fair rent is 300, higher of 1 and 2 is 350, standard rent in this case is not there. ऐसा भी हो सकता है, शायद वहाँ पर rent control act levied नहीं है. RER in this case would be 350. My actual rent received or receivable is 400, and therefore my gross annual value in this particular case comes to 400. Last illustration before we move on. Municipal value is 100, fair rent is 120, higher of 1 and 2 gives me 120, standard rent is 120, reasonable expected rent is 120 because everything is 120 here. Actual rent received and receivable is 100. We have to be careful. Our RER is 120, that is, and our actual rent received or receivable is 100, and therefore my gross annual value in this case is going to be 120. ये सारे illustrations देखने के बाद एक conceptual चीज मैं यहाँ पर share करूँगी. See, that is also to not make the lecture monotonous. Plus, whatever small concepts I keep discussing here are going to help you in understanding the subject more and maybe give you an upper hand in cracking your MCQs. So let us discuss one small concept here. Typically, when we talk of, yes, we will be coming to vacancy and unrealized rent. Let's have some patience. So when we talk of real income and notional income, ये एक थियरी है इनकम टैक्स में. रियल इनकम टिपिकली वो होता है जो आप रिसीव करते हो, जैसे आपके बैंक अकाउंट में पैसा आया, आपने सैलरी रिसीव की, आपने बिजनेस करके कुछ प्रॉफिट्स अर्न किए एक्सेट्रा. सो दैट इज रियल इनकम. देयर इज अनदर कॉन्सेप्ट इन इनकम टैक्स एक्ट व्हिच इज कॉल्ड एज नोशनल इनकम. एंड कई बार ऐसे होता है कि ये नोशनल इनकम पे भी आपको टैक्स देना पड़ता है. सो ये नोशनल इनकम जो होती है वो टिपिकली आपने अर्न नहीं की है, राइट? ये सिर्फ बिलीव किया गया है कि ये नोशनल इनकम आपको रिसीव हुई है. एंड दिस पर्टिकुलर इंस्टेंस wherein your RER is more, that is your expected rent is more than your actual rent, and you are charging to tax this reasonable expected rent, is a very good example of your notional income being taxed. So यहाँ पर second illustration अगर हम देखते हैं तो मेरा reasonable expected rent है 90, जबकि मैंने actually receive किया है 80. फिर भी मैं टैक्स कितने पे दे रही हूँ? मैं टैक्स पे कर रही हूँ 90. सो ये वो सिनेरियो हो गया जो मैंने 10 रुपए कमाए ही नहीं है, उस पे मुझे टैक्स देना पड़ रहा है. So this is where a notional income is taxed. So if someone asks you a question, under Income Tax Act, notional income is also charged to tax. Let us say true or false. या comment whether notional income is charged to tax under income tax. आपका जवाब क्या होना है? Yes. And example में आप ये example लिख सकते हो. So this is one case where a notional income is charged to tax. Okay, so I'm assuming that we are all through with understanding these basic aspects about the formula and the computation manner which is there. Going a bit further, what is the concept of vacancy? So usually vacancy क्या होता है? Supposing एक property मैं own करती हूँ जिसको मैंने let out किया है. अभी during the period of the lease or during the period of the tenure when it was let out, मेरा टेनेंट जो है वो प्रॉपर्टी से निकल गया, राइट? उसको रेंट ज्यादा लगाया, उसको कहीं और कुछ बेटर अपॉर्चुनिटी मिल गई एंड ही लेफ्ट द प्रॉपर्टी. नाउ इन द मिडल ऑफ द टर्म आई एम डेस्परेटली ट्राइंग टू फाइंड अनदर टेनेंट ताकि प्रॉपर्टी से जो मेरा इनकम आ रहा है वो जारी रहे, प्रॉपर्टी आइडल ना रहे. तो मेरी कोशिश जारी है कि मैं कोई दूसरा टेनेंट ढूंढ लूं, लेकिन मुझे इतना इजीली टेनेंट मिल नहीं रहा. So there is an intention to let out the property on the behalf of the landlord. There are efforts being made to find out a tenant, but there is nobody available. And therefore, my property remains vacant or it remains without a tenant. So whenever a let out property is without a tenant, but there always exists an intention to let out the property, that particular scenario is called the concept of vacancy. Now, what happens when vacancy comes into picture in our computation? So, like we said, GAV का जो हमने computation देखा था, उसमें अभी तक हमने दो parameters देखे हैं. First was reasonable expected rent या annual lettable value, however you refer to it. Step B was actual rent received or receivable. अगर किसी क्वेश्चन में, अगर कोई सिनेरियो में आपको वेकेंसी के बारे में कुछ बोला जाता है, तो आपको चेक करना है कि ये दो कंडीशंस जो अभी मैं आपके साथ शेयर करने वाली हूँ वो फुलफिल होते हैं या नहीं. अगर वो दोनों कंडीशंस फुलफिल हो जाते हैं, in that case we have to do step C, which is related to concept of vacancy. So first condition is the property is vacant, and second condition is my actual rent is less than my reasonable expected rent. मतलब समझो 12 महीने के टेन्योर में 2 महीने प्रॉपर्टी की वेकेंसी थी, 10 महीनों के लिए प्रॉपर्टी लेट आउट की गई थी. तो आपका एक्चुअल रेंट जो इस केस में रहा होगा दैट विल बी फॉर अ पीरियड ऑफ 10 मंथ्स. सो सेकंड स्टेप में मुझे चेक क्या करना है कि जो भी एक्चुअल रेंट मैंने कमाया है क्या वो मेरे रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट से कम है. अगर वो अमाउंट कम है और मेरी प्रॉपर्टी वेकेंट है तो मुझे स्टेप सी फॉलो करना है. स्टेप सी क्या है मैं बताऊं, पहले ये लॉजिक समझ लें. So suppose in a particular case my RER is 2 lakhs and my actual rent is 25,000 rupees per month. There is a vacancy of 2 months. मतलब कि actual rent जो है वो मैंने 10 months के लिए रिसीव किया है. So यहाँ पर ये particular scenario में मेरा vacancy होने के बावजूद एक्चुअल रेंट जो है वो 2,50,000 है, जो मेरे रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट से ज्यादा है. इसीलिए यहाँ पर मुझे ये स्टेप सी जो मैं अभी सिखाने वाली हूँ वो करने की जरूरत नहीं है. स्टेप सी हमें कब करना पड़ेगा? जब मेरा एक्चुअल रेंट आफ्टर कंसिडरिंग द वेकेंसी पीरियड इज लेस देन एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी या फिर एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट, तब जाकर मैं स्टेप सी करती हूँ. सो व्हाट डू आई डू इन स्टेप सी? बेसिकली स्टेप सी में मुझे क्या करना है? मुझे ऐड करना है मेरा एक्चुअल रेंट एंड मेरा वेकेंसी पीरियड रेंट. करेक्ट? एक इलस्ट्रेशन के साथ हम इसको समझेंगे. सपोज एक एग्जांपल में मेरा रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट है 44,000. My actual rent is 4,000 rupees per month. There is a vacancy period of 2 months. Therefore, my actual rent received and receivable comes to 40,000. The step C, which I spoke of in the earlier slide, is wherein I add my actual rent and my vacancy period rent. So यहाँ पर मेरा actual rent जो है वो हो जाएगा 4,000 rupees into 10 months, which is the period for which my property is let out. Correct? Plus my vacancy period rent, which is 4,000 rupees into 2 months, which is the period of vacancy. So my actual rent plus my vacancy rent in this case comes to 48,000. Right? I repeat again. Step C मुझे तब करना होता है जब मैं दो conditions simultaneously fulfill करती हूँ. Correct? First condition is my property is vacant. Second condition is my actual rent is less than my reasonable expected rent. In this illustration, my RER for the 12-month period is 44,000. My actual rent per month is 4,000 rupees. There is a vacancy period of 2 months. So my actual rent received or receivable is 40,000. Since my actual rent received or receivable is less than the expected rent, what I have to do in this case is I have to add my actual rent and vacancy period rent. In this example, it comes to 48,000. In this case, since my actual rent plus vacancy rent is more than my reasonable expected rent, my gross annual value is going to be 40,000. So यहाँ पर क्वेश्चन ये है कि अगर मेरा एक्चुअल रेंट प्लस वैकेंसी रेंट का जो फिगर आता है, जो यहाँ पर 48,000 आता है, वो मेरे RER से ज्यादा है. मतलब अगर इस प्रॉपर्टी में वैकेंसी नहीं होती तो टेनेंट RER से ज्यादा, लैंडलॉर्ड RER से ज्यादा अर्न करने वाला था. Had there not been any vacancy in this particular property, the landlord would have earned more or equal to what was the expectation from this property. Therefore, the gross annual value in this case will be the actual rent, which is 40,000, because landlord has no intention of suppressing the rental income. Right? I hope I make myself clear. Let me just repeat. In step C, what I do is I add my actual rent with the vacancy period rent, which in this illustration comes to 48,000, which is more than the expected rent of the property. इससे हम क्या कंक्लूजन निकालते हैं? ये कंक्लूजन निकालते हैं कि अगर इस प्रॉपर्टी में वैकेंसी नहीं होती तो ये टेनेंट जो है वो एक्सपेक्टेशन से तो ज्यादा ही कमा रहा था. मतलब वो रेंट सप्रेस करने का कोई चांस या कोई यहाँ पर रेंट सप्रेस करने की उसकी इंटेंशन नहीं है. इसीलिए हम टेनेंट को बेनिफिट देंगे और बोलेंगे कि भाई इस केस में योर GAV विल बी द एक्चुअल रेंट विच इज 40,000. इसका एक अलग इलस्ट्रेशन भी देखते हैं ताकि चीजें और क्लियर हो. सेकेंड इलस्ट्रेशन में सपोज माय RER फॉर द एंटायर 12-month पीरियड इज 50,000. My actual rent per month is 4,000 rupees. There is again a vacancy element of 2 months. In this case, my actual rent received or receivable is 40,000 rupees. अभी मेरा actual rent जो है यहाँ पर वो मेरे reasonable expected rent से कम है. That is why what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add my actual rent and my vacancy period rent, which is 40,000 for 10 months plus 4,000, which is 1 month current, into 2 months, which gives me 48,000. So step C में मैंने मेरे actual rent में vacancy period rent add किया और मुझे 48,000 आया. अभी इस वाले illustration में देखिए ये AR plus VR का जो आपका amount है वो आपके expectation से कम है. इसके पहले वाले इलस्ट्रेशन में AR प्लस VR का जो अमाउंट था वो आपके एक्सपेक्टेशन से ज्यादा था. मतलब वहां पर फर्स्ट इलस्ट्रेशन में हमने ये कंक्लूड किया था कि असेसी ने जो कम कमाया है, that is totally attributable to vacancy. In this case, your AR plus VR figure is 48,000 and your expected rent is 50,000. So what happens here is, even though there would not have been a vacancy, my assessee was still earning less than the expectation. Second वाले illustration में अगर ये particular assessee का vacancy नहीं होता, फिर भी वो reasonable expected rent से तो कम ही कमा रहा है. मतलब क्या उसका जो लॉस है, या जो हम बोल सकते हैं जो उसने कम अर्न किया है, is it totally attributable to vacancy? Answer is no, because even if there had been no vacancy, he is earning less. मतलब यहाँ पर vacancy के साथ साथ there is an element of suppressing your rental income या फिर intentionally earning less, undercharging of rent. Therefore, in this particular case, the GAV will be the expected rent, which is 50,000, which is also the reasonable expected rent. I'm sure we all are somewhere clear here. I'll just repeat the second illustration. Second illustration में मेरी property का RER for the entire 12-month period is 50,000. My actual rent in this case is 4,000 per month. There is a vacancy period here of 2 months. So my actual rent received or receivable comes to 40,000. My actual rent plus vacancy period rent in this example is 48,000, which means that despite the fact कि मेरे property में कोई भी vacancy नहीं होती, मैं actual मेरे expected rent से कम कमा रही हूँ. तो मेरे कम कमाने की वजह खाली vacancy नहीं है, पर undercharging भी है. इसलिए ये particular illustration में मेरा gross annual value होगा मेरा expected rent, which is 50,000. So this is the concept of vacancy, which we should all keep in mind. Step C करने का जरूरत कभी होता है. Step C आपको तब करना है जब दो conditions fulfill हो. The property is vacant and my actual rent is less than my reasonable expected rent. Okay. I hope this concept is clear. If not, when we would be taking up queries in some time, we can just look at that. I will now move on to the next concept. This is just a chart which I have put on, which summarizes my explanation in the earlier slides. All these notes and recordings would be available to you. So I request all the students who are listening to these lectures live to please focus on the content which is being explained here. थोड़ा बहुत pointers बनाना है तो बना लो, लेकिन ज़्यादा लिखने में struggle मत करो, because ये presentation as well as ये recording आपको available होंगे. अभी फिलहाल ध्यान दीजिए. So vacancy में actual rent is less than RER. So there can be two situations. My actual rent can be less than my RER just because of vacancy. What is the test to check that? Test is step C, which we did, which is actual rent plus vacancy period rent. If it is greater than or equal to my reasonable expected rent, उसका ये मतलब होता है कि असेसी ने जो भी कम अर्न किया है वो केवल वेकेंसी की वजह से किया है, एंड इस वजह से द ग्रॉस एनुअल वैल्यू शुड बी द एक्चुअल रेंट. The second scenario here is when my actual rent is less than RER and I do my vacancy wala step C. The test is again the same. I add my vacancy period rent to the actual rent. In this case, if that is less than the expected rent, then my gross annual value is my reasonable expected rent. Coming back to the format, we are just going to deliberate more. I'm sure हम सबको पता चल गया है अभी कि gross annual value कैसे compute करना है. किसी ने बीच में सवाल पूछा था unrealized rent का, हम उस पर भी आएंगे one step at a time. Vacancy पहले हमने cover कर लिया है. Coming back to the format, gross annual value से हम शुरू करते हैं. We all understood the formula. इसमें से जो एक चीज आप लेस करते हो, which is property taxes और municipal taxes paid and borne by the owner. यहाँ पर ये दो words जो आपके स्लाइड में जो हाईलाइट होके आए हैं, paid and borne, बहुत ही important है. I'll just take you back to a few slides earlier. जब हम actual rent received और receivable की बात कर रहे थे, तब मैंने कहा था कि अगर किसी पर्टिकुलर मंथ का रेंट जो है आपको मिला नहीं है पर ड्यू है, तो भी आपको उसको इंक्लूड करना है इन कंप्यूटिंग द ग्रॉस एनुअल वैल्यू। यहाँ पर जब हम म्युनिसिपल टैक्सेस का डिडक्शन लेते हैं तो प्लीज फोकस कीजिए, द वर्ड विच इज यूज्ड हियर इज पेड, which means that a deduction is possible only in respect of those property taxes which have been actually paid during the year. So supposing कोई municipal taxes अगर outstanding है for the year और अभी तक landlord ने या owner of the property ने उसे pay नहीं किया है, तो आप उसका deduction यहाँ पर नहीं ले सकते। I repeat, any amount of municipal taxes which are outstanding for the year cannot be reduced in computation of your income from house property from the gross annual value. Second aspect which I would like to point out here is, supposing there are some municipal taxes which you have paid in advance, जैसे अगले 2 साल का municipal tax मैंने इसी साल पे कर दिया, तो ठीक है वो अभी तक ड्यू नहीं हुआ है, पर क्योंकि मैंने उस अमाउंट को पे कर दिया है, मैं वो अमाउंट का भी डिडक्शन यहाँ पर ले सकती हूँ। यहाँ पर पीरियड का कोई लॉजिक नहीं है, आप जैसे भी उसको पे कर रहे हैं जिस भी पीरियड में, आप उसका यहाँ पर डिडक्शन ले सकते हैं। सेकेंड इंपॉर्टेंट वर्ड विच इज हाईलाइटेड हियर इज बोर्न बाय द ओनर। इसका ये मतलब होता है कि हम खाली उन्हीं म्युनिसिपल टैक्सेस का डिडक्शन ले सकते हैं जो लैंडलॉर्ड ने खुद इनकर किए। जैसे अगर कोई अमाउंट है जो टेनेंट ने पे किया है, समझो यूजुअली तो लैंडलॉर्ड ही पे करता है, पर अगर कुछ कंपोनेंट ऑफ म्युनिसिपल टैक्स है जो टेनेंट ने पे किया है, तो in that case also the landlord is not in a position to take the deduction because he should have borne that particular amount. So these are two special aspects about municipal taxes paid. That brings us to the net annual value. Net annual value में से हम दो deductions लेंगे. First is 30% of the net annual value and second is interest on loans. इन दोनों डिडक्शंस को भी आने वाले स्लाइड्स में मैंने डिटेल में डिस्कस किया है। ये दो डिडक्शंस लेने के बाद वी आर लेफ्ट विद इनकम फ्रॉम हाउस प्रॉपर्टी। So let's go further quickly. The first deduction which we take from the net annual value is on account of standard deduction, which is also called as the ad hoc deduction, which is at 30% of my net annual value. One important point which we should all note here is, irrespective of the actual expenses which I have incurred with regards to the property, the only deduction which I am permitted to take is this 30% of NAV. जैसे अगर मैं प्रॉपर्टी मेंटेन कर रही हूँ तो काफी सारे एक्सपेंसेस मैं इनकर करती रहूंगी, इंश्योरेंस प्रीमियम पे किया, कुछ छोटा मोटा रिपेयर्स इनकर किया, कहीं पे कुछ मेंटेनेंस पे कर दिया, तो इन कुछ लैंड रेंट, ग्राउंड रेंट पे किया, इन सारे अमाउंट्स का मुझे इंडिविजुअली डिडक्शन नहीं मिलता है। I am not entitled to take individual deduction of the various expenses which I incurred in the upkeep of this particular property. What I am entitled to is only in respect of 30% of the NAV. Correct? Okay. So there are some queries coming up which are distracting me, which is regards to unrealized rent, arrears of rent. Don't worry, everything will be covered. Just stay tuned in. There might be people who are a bit behind. There might be people who are a bit ahead. We have to average out the speed to match with everyone's frequency. I'm sure most of you are understanding it. So this is the standard deduction or the ad hoc deduction. Coming to the next deduction, which is in respect of interest on loan. So प्रॉपर्टी के रिस्पेक्ट में इन 5 पर्पसेस के लिए अगर आपने कुछ लोन लिया है जिसके ऊपर आप कुछ इंटरेस्ट पे करने वाले हो, तो आप उसका डिडक्शन यहाँ पर ले सकते हो। The purposes here are interest taken on loans availed for the purchase, construction, repairs, renewal or reconstruction of the property. So these are the 2 deductions which we can avail from the net annual value. एक क्वेश्चन यहाँ पर मुझे पूछना है, if there is any loan which is taken to repay the original loan was taken for the purpose of purchase of property. ध्यान से सुनिए, ऐसी छोटी चीजें ही हैं जो MCQs में बड़ी बनकर आती हैं. So if there was any interest on loan which is taken to repay the original loan and the original loan was taken for either of these 5 purposes of purchase, construction, repairs, renewal or reconstruction, then will interest on such new loan be allowed as a deduction? Answer is yes. So long as the original loan is taken for any of these 5 stipulated purposes, even if I take a top-up loan or a fresh loan to repay the original loan, I will still be entitled to claim deduction in respect of interest. इंटरेस्ट ऑन अनपेड परचेज प्राइस इज ऑल्सो एलिजिबल. जैसे सेलर को आपने कुछ समझो आपने 1 CR में कोई प्रॉपर्टी खरीदी किसी पर्सन से और आपने उसको कहा कि 40 lakhs जो है भैया वो मैं 2 साल के पीरियड में दूँ, पर वो 40 lakhs पे the seller asks you to pay some 8% interest. So that interest is also in a way interest on account of purchase of property, and that will also be allowed in the course of computation of your income. So that brings us to a small poser on the slide. Any expenses on insurance, ground rent, etc. to be allowed as deduction in computation of IFHP? Answer is no, because what we are getting is deduction of the standard deduction or the ad hoc deduction. Here I would again like to put in one small concept. I have put on a sentence on the slide here which says that the list of deductions is exhaustive. So income tax mein there are this concepts, there is such as exhaustive and there is something which is inclusive. So वापस ये एक छोटा सा concept जैसे real and notional income कुछ समय पहले हमने deal किया था. So what exactly do we mean by exhaustive and what do we mean by inclusive? In terms को explain करने के लिए मैं definitions का support दूँ. So अगर आप section 2 को analyze करते हैं, हम यहाँ पर कोई definitions अभी रटाने वाले नहीं हैं, but I'll just give you an idea. So अगर हम पर्सन का डेफिनेशन देखते हैं या हम प्रीवियस ईयर असेसमेंट ईयर का डेफिनेशन देखते हैं तो वो सारे डेफिनेशंस एग्जॉस्टिव है. एग्जॉस्टिव मतलब लिमिटेड है, जो बोला गया है उतनी ही चीजें उनमें कवर्ड है. पर अगर हम इनकम की डेफिनेशन देखते हैं जो सेक्शन 224 में है, वो बोलता है इनकम इंक्लूड्स. सो वो एक इंक्लूसिव डेफिनेशन है जिसका ये मतलब है कि उसमें जो कवर्ड है आइटम्स उनके अलावा और कुछ चीजें भी वहां पर कवर हो सकती हैं. So this is the difference between an exhaustive list and an inclusive list. Yes, I will be taking up questions on interest on loan as well. We would be discussing that first. So the list of deductions here is exhaustive. So this we already discussed. Municipal taxes are allowed on payment basis and interest which is deductible is on accrual basis. Also rent which is included is on accrual basis. So one important point I would like to highlight here is while we are computing income from house property, there is no typical method of accounting that we are adhering to. अगर आपने नोट किया हो, जैसे हम पीजीबीपी के सम्स जब करते हैं तो या तो हम कैश बेसिस में होते हैं या मर्केंटाइल बेसिस में होते हैं, व्हाटएवर इज द मेथड ऑफ अकाउंटिंग एडॉप्टेड बाय द एसएससी. लेकिन इनकम फ्रॉम हाउस प्रॉपर्टी में ऐसा कोई पैटर्न हमें दिखाई नहीं देता है. म्युनिसिपल टैक्सेस पेमेंट बेसिस पे अलाउ हो रहे हैं, इंटरेस्ट ऑन लोन अक्रूवल बेसिस पे हो रहा है. सो देयर इज नो रिजिडिटी ओवर हियर एज फार एज योर मेथड गोज. हर चीज की अपनी अलग लॉजिक है. Okay, coming to the concept wherein we had seen an amendment now, I think थोड़ा सा हम इसको quickly लेके जाते हैं so that by 9:45, which is the time for doubts to be taken up, we have covered quite a lot of portion. So यहाँ पर amendment ये हुआ है कि इस attempt के पहले तक, so prior to Finance Act 2019, the benefit in respect of self-occupied property was restricted to only one property. Post the amendment, annual value of any two self-occupied properties can be taken as nil. तो एसएससी को स्लाइट बेनिफिट यहाँ पर दिया हुआ है, जैसे एसएससी के 2 अलग-अलग लोकेशंस पे घर होंगे एंड वो वहां पे आता जाता रहता है, तो दोनों की एनुअल वैल्यू आप निल ले सकते हो. दैट इज द अमेंडमेंट. इससे पहले एक घर की एनुअल वैल्यू हम निल ले सकते थे, अभी हम 2 प्रॉपर्टीज की एनुअल वैल्यू निल ले सकते हैं. This house or part of the house has to be used by the assessee for the purpose of his own residence, or he is not able to occupy that particular house property due to his employment or business or profession. So these are the reasons the property remains unoccupied. And the first was the case where the property is self-occupied by the assessee for the purpose of his own residence. Self-occupied property का जो computation है वो शुरू होता है NAV nil से. Going further, what happens if such self-occupied property is let out during the year? So in this case, section 23(2) will not apply. अगर मैंने self occupied property को थोड़े से period के लिए भी let out कर दिया, तो उसका classification जो है वो let out property में हो जाएगा. मैं उस property का NAV nil नहीं ले सकती. Coming to the two deductions under 24 again. House property जो self occupied है उसमें से the standard deduction of 30% from the NAV will not be available because in this situation my NAV is nil. Deduction in respect of interest on loan is available, yes, subject to certain limits. Let us try and understand the deduction in respect of interest on loan in case of self occupied properties, to what extent it is allowed and what is the manner in which we are going to compute the same. So ये पार्ट समझने के लिए एक डेट हमें याद रखनी है. वो डेट है 1st April 1999. If my loan is borrowed or if my loan is taken prior to 1/4/1999, the maximum amount of interest which can be deducted in respect of both the self-occupied properties is 30,000 rupees. The loan can be taken for any of the 5 purposes which we discussed earlier. It could be purchase, construction, repairs, reconstruction, renovation. So if the loan is obtained prior to 1/4/99, the maximum deduction in respect of both properties will be 30,000. If the loan is borrowed on or after 1/4/1999, if it is taken for the purpose of repairs, renewal or reconstruction, the maximum deduction is 30,000. If it is taken for the purpose of purchase or construction, the maximum deduction available is going to be 2 lakhs. So यहाँ पर जो amendment है वो ये है कि despite the fact कि 2 self occupied properties के लिए आपको benefit दिया गया था of the NAV being nil, interest का जो deduction है, that interest deduction will be restricted to 2 lakh rupees for both the properties taken together. Another important point, if I have most of these category of loans running, जैसे यहाँ पर मैंने category A loans को बोला है are those loans which are taken prior to 1/4/99. Category B loans are those which are taken on or after 1/4/99 for the purpose of repairs, reconstruction, renewal, etc. And category C loans are those loans which are taken on or after 1/4/99 for the purpose of purchase or construction. So A plus B, if it is there, the maximum interest deductible is 30,000. A plus C, if it is there, the maximum interest which is deductible is 2 lakhs. And if at all I have all the 3 types of loans running in respect of the properties which I am self-occupying, the maximum amount of deduction in this case cannot exceed 2 lakhs. So this chart will be available to you when the notes are circulated. Please don't waste time in writing it. I am just moving on to the next slide. So what are the conditions for availing this incremental deduction of 2 lakh rupees? There is an error in this slide. Instead of 250, it should be 2 lakhs. Don't worry. This loan should be taken on or after 1/4/99. The purpose should be purchase or construction, and the construction period the construction activity should be completed within a period of 5 years from the end of financial year in which the loan is taken. So that was all about interest on property in respect of self-occupied properties. Moving on to the next concept, which is for deemed to be let out properties. In case there is an assessee who is owning more than 2 self-occupied properties, then all the other properties at the option of the assessee, 2 properties will be treated as self-occupied and all the other properties are going to be treated as deemed to be let out properties. जैसे मेरे पास 3 house properties हैं, तीनों मैं self occupied करती हूँ, उनमें से किसी 2 properties के लिए मैं self occupied properties NAV nil का benefit ले सकती हूँ, और जो तीसरी प्रॉपर्टी है जो भी मैं सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाई कर रही हूँ, इनकम टैक्स उसको अज्यूम करेगा टू बी अ डीम्ड टू बी लेट आउट प्रॉपर्टी. Which property has to be offered as DLOP is a call which the assessee takes at his option. This option of offering either of the properties as DLOP can be changed on an year-to-year basis. So the computation for a DLOP happens as if it is a LOP. No changes therein. Only in this case, the actual rent figure will not be there. Apna RER is going to be my GAV in this particular case. Okay, so this is the concept of DLOP. I repeat, this option is changeable every year. It is at the option of the assessee to choose any one property as DLOP, and the computation of a property which is a DLOP will happen as if it is a LOP. Okay, going further. So for GAV, in case of a DLOP, will be my reasonable expected rent. Baki ka computation remains same as LOP. There will be no restriction on amount of interest which will be deductible because it is treated as a deemed to be letter of property. So now we are coming to a very important concept in IFHP. If you ask me, friends, there are 2-3 concepts in IFHP which are very important. और ये कॉन्सेप्ट्स अगर हमने अच्छे से समझ लिए तो समझिए कि IFHP का जो क्रक्स है वो हमें पता चल जाएगा. एंड यहाँ पर the next concept we are coming to is pre-construction interest. So let us all pay attention to this important concept here. So is it possible that interest has accrued but the construction is not yet complete? So what will be the implications? So just to give you an example, supposing मैंने एक property purchase की है, under construction property है, building बन रही है, loan लेकर मैंने उस property को purchase किया है, तो मेरे EMI का मीटर जो है वो next month से शुरू हो जाता है, पर property बनने में अभी 2 साल की देरी है. तो of course जब property picture में ही नहीं है, I'm not offering it to tax. So question comes into our mind that what is going to happen to the amount of interest which I'm still servicing as a part of the EMI. Let us have a look at this particular diagram here and then understand it. Supposing in the previous year 2009-10, on the 1st of April 2009, I have taken a loan for the purpose of construction of a property. It has taken some while for this construction activity to go on. So let us say construction activity चला and then ये सारे period में interest तो मैं pay कर रही थी. Builder जो है वो building बना रहा था, मैंने loan ले लिया था एक under construction property के लिए, and ये पूरे period के दौरान construction activity जारी है, मैं interest pay करते जा रही हूँ लेकिन property existence में नहीं है. Let us say in the previous year 15-16, my construction of the property was completed and the property became available. Now from the period 9-10 to the period 14-15, my construction is going on and I have paid interest, but there is no mechanism for me to take deduction in respect of that interest because I have no property which I am offering to tax. So ये जो पूरा पीरियड है जो यहाँ पर ये ब्लू लाइन से हाईलाइट किया हो गया है, वो पीरियड का इंटरेस्ट जो है उसे मैं क्या करती हूँ, मैं अक्यूमुलेट करती हूँ. इस पीरियड को मैं बोलती हूँ प्री कंस्ट्रक्शन पीरियड एंड इस इंटरेस्ट को मैं बोलती हूँ प्री कंस्ट्रक्शन इंटरेस्ट. दिस इंटरेस्ट आई स्टार्ट क्लेमिंग बाय वे ऑफ अ डिडक्शन from the previous year in which my property is completed. In our example, it is previous year 15-16. So my pre-construction period is the period beginning on the first day or on the date of loan, to put it simply. In my case here it is 1st April 2009. ये date अलग भी हो सकती है, जरूरी नहीं है first day of the previous year को. So pre-construction period begins on the date of borrowing. It ends on the 31st March immediately preceding the year of completion of construction. That is the date of completion of construction. Supposing my property was completed on 5th September 2015. So my pre-construction period is going to end on 31st March 2015. So that is my pre-construction period. My interest for this particular period I'm going to accumulate and I'm going to take deduction of this interest from the year in which my property got completed, which in our example is 15-16. Right? I hope ये diagram आपको थोड़ा समझ में आया हो. Now we move on to understand what I am saying. I'll just put it up on slides so it is easier for us to understand. So what I do is I accumulate the interest for the pre-construction period and I claim it as deduction equally over a period of 5 years beginning from the previous year in which my property was constructed. This I have to do because in the period under which my property was in construction, my charging section was inapplicable because there was no property in existence. So the moment the property came in existence, I will start claiming deduction of this pre-construction interest. So claim deduction from previous year 15-16 uniformly in 5 equal installments. Thus, pre-construction period is date of loan से लेकर 31st March immediately preceding the year of completion of construction. Interest for this particular period is called as pre-construction interest, and it is allowed in 5 equal installments beginning from the previous year in which the construction activity is completed. Now we come to two small concepts in IFHP. आप में से कितने लोगों ने इनको इस तरीके से पढ़ा है पता नहीं, लेकिन पढ़ा तो सबने होगा, बिकॉज ये वो केसेस से डील करता है जब आपको क्वेश्चन में कभी आता है कि ये प्रॉपर्टी वाज पार्टली लेट आउट फॉर अ ईयर एंड पार्टली इट वाज सेल्फ ऑक्युपाइड. So there are these two concepts which are one concept is of an area wise PLOP and the second concept is of a period wise PLOP. So let us have a look at the diagram straight away so that it is easier for us to understand. Let us say this entire rectangle here is for a particular property which is divided into two equal halves. समझ लीजिए 1000 स्क्वायर फीट की ये प्रॉपर्टी है, 500 वैसे ग्राउंड फ्लोर फर्स्ट फ्लोर है. ग्राउंड फ्लोर जो है वो मैंने लेट आउट किया है एंड फर्स्ट फ्लोर इट इज व्हिच आई एम ऑक्यूपाइंग फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ माय ओन रेजिडेंस. So this particular property, I have divided it on the basis of area. One part is my LOP and one part is my SOP. Since there is a clear-cut bifurcation in this case on the basis of area, they become two distinct units comprised in one single property, and therefore we are going to have two computations in respect of this property. The first one will be in respect of the ground floor, which is LOP, and the computation here will be as per the format which we discussed. For the first floor, we'll have computation as if it is a SOP, and the computation will begin from NAV being nil. So when it is an area-wise PLOP, we have two computations based on the let-out property and the self-occupied property aspect. Moving on to the next concept, which is concept of period-wise PLOP. So what happens in a period-wise PLOP is your property is not divided into any particular area-wise bifurcation. What happens is the property is let out and self-occupied on the basis of time. तो यहाँ पर जैसे आप देख रहे हैं टाइम के बेसिस पे ये प्रॉपर्टी को मैंने डिवाइड किया है. जैसे फर्स्ट 9 months इट इज अ सेल्फ ऑक्युपाइड प्रॉपर्टी एंड द नेक्स्ट 3 months इट इज अ लेट आउट प्रॉपर्टी. तो यहाँ पर जो है जो 12 months के पीरियड में मैंने कुछ दिनों के लिए प्रॉपर्टी को सेल्फ ऑक्युपाइड रखा, कुछ दिनों के लिए लेट आउट रखा. इस सिनेरियो में दो कंप्यूटेशंस पॉसिबल नहीं है. आई विल जस्ट हैव टू डू वन कंप्यूटेशन एंड दैट आल्सो एज इफ द प्रॉपर्टी इज अ लेट आउट प्रॉपर्टी, because once it is a LOP it will always be treated as a LOP. उसको आप SOP LOP में bifurcate नहीं कर सकते. So यहाँ पर क्या होगा कि पूरे 12 months के टेन्योर के लिए इस प्रॉपर्टी को हम LOP ही मानेंगे. अब आपके मन में immediately there will be a question, what will be the RER which we will take? RER जो है हम पूरे 12 months का consider करेंगे because like I said, once you let out a property, it is going to be treated as a let out property. Once you let out the property, it is going to be treated as a let out property and you won't be given the benefit of time wise allocation of SOP and LOP. So याद क्या रखना है, एरिया वाइज एरिया के बेसिस पे अगर प्रॉपर्टी को डिवाइड किया गया है तो हम दो कंप्यूटेशंस करते हैं. LOP एरिया के लिए LOP वाला कंप्यूटेशन, SOP एरिया के लिए SOP वाला कंप्यूटेशन. अगर प्रॉपर्टी को पीरियड के बेसिस पे डिवाइड किया गया है, थोड़े दिनों के लिए SOP, थोड़े दिनों के लिए LOP, तो हम पूरे प्रॉपर्टी के लिए एक ही कंप्यूटेशन करेंगे एज इफ इट वाज LOP फॉर द एंटायर ईयर. I hope this concept is clear. Let us move further. Coming to unrealized rent, quite a few people had asked me कि भाई unrealized rent का क्या होना है, तो अब जवाब सुन लीजिए. Taking you back to the GAV computation which we had, जहाँ पर हम actual rent की बात कर रहे थे, तो GAV के computation में दो parameters थे. Step A was reasonable expected rent, step B was actual rent received or receivable. तो वहां पे स्टेप बी में जब हम एक्चुअल रेंट रिसीव्ड और रिसीवेबल की बात कर रहे थे तो वहां से हम अनरियलाइज रेंट को एक्सक्लूड कर देते हैं. सो व्हेन वी आर डिराइविंग आवर एक्चुअल रेंट, हम अनरियलाइज रेंट को उसमें इंक्लूड नहीं करते. अनरियलाइज रेंट होता क्या है? अनरियलाइज रेंट इज जस्ट लाइक बैड डेट्स व्हाट वी हैव अंडर पीजीबीपी. तो अगर हमारा टेनेंट जो है वो हमारा रेंट कुछ मंथ्स का उसने डुबा दिया है, like there is no intention of from the tenant side to pay up that rent, for the landlord it becomes unrealized rent, which is reduced in computation of my GAV at the time I'm computing my actual rent received or receivable. To reduce this unrealized rent from my computation, there are certain conditions which I have to fulfill, right? These are the conditions. Firstly, the tenancy has to be bona fide. The defaulting tenant has vacated or steps have been taken to vacate him from the property. This tenant is not occupying any other property of the assessee, and there have been legal proceedings which have been initiated against the tenant. So ये सारे conditions अगर fulfill होते हैं तो आप इस unrealized rent को actual rent received और receivable में से less करोगे in computing your GAV. इस अनरियलाइज रेंट की रिकवरी भी होती है, और रिकवरी पे इसका क्या टैक्स ट्रीटमेंट है वो हम समझेंगे टुवर्ड्स द एंड ऑफ दिस लेक्चर और थोड़े स्लाइड्स के बाद. फिलहाल हमने ये समझ लिया कि कंप्यूटेशन के दौरान अनरियलाइज रेंट को हमें एक्चुअल रेंट रिसीव्ड और रिसीवेबल अमाउंट के अंदर इंक्लूड नहीं करना है. ओके, एक पोजर यहाँ पर, अगर मैंने इंडिया के बाहर से लोन लिया हुआ है, जैसे आई हैव बोरोड मनी फ्रॉम आउटसाइड इंडिया एंड आई एम पेइंग इंटरेस्ट एंड दिस मनी हैज बीन बोरोड फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ मे बी परचेज और कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी, am I allowed to take deduction in respect of the interest which I pay outside India? Answer is yes. दो कंडीशंस के फुलफिल होने पर आप इस इंटरेस्ट का डिडक्शन ले सकते हो. कंडीशन नंबर 1, इस इंटरेस्ट अमाउंट पे आपने टीडीएस डिडक्ट करना होना चाहिए. कंडीशन नंबर 2, जिस किसी नॉन रेजिडेंट को आप ये इंटरेस्ट पे कर रहे हो वो बंदे का यहाँ पर एजेंट होना चाहिए. ये दोनों कंडीशंस क्यूमुलेटिव है जिनके फुलफिलमेंट पर आप इंटरेस्ट ऑन अमाउंट बोरोड फ्रॉम आउटसाइड इंडिया का डिडक्शन ले सकते हो. गोइंग फर्दर, coming to treatment of unrealized rent, I think what we'll do is after we are through with the treatment of unrealized rent and arrears of rent, we will take a small breather and we'll address some queries which have come up during this period so that it becomes easier. Now, what is the treatment for recovery of unrealized rent? यहाँ पर हम tit for tat model follow करते हैं. I'll just explain इसका क्या मतलब है. जब हम एक्चुअल रेंट रिसीव्ड और रिसीवेबल कंप्यूट कर रहे थे तो हम अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट को एक्सक्लूड कर रहे थे एंड देन वी यूज्ड टू गो अबाउट विद आवर कैलकुलेशंस. अगर ये अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट पहले एक्सक्लूड हो गया है और बाद में रिकवर हुआ तो हम उसको उतने ही हद तक टैक्स करेंगे जितना ये पहले टैक्स हुआ. I will give an example. I request all of you to listen clearly. Unfortunately, ये example slide में नहीं है क्योंकि हम आगे जाकर इसको कहीं question में cover कर रहे हैं. That is the reason. Listen to me carefully. Supposing my reasonable expected rent for a particular year for a property is, let us say, 2,40,000, 20,000 rupees per month, which is 2,40,000. मेरा RER यहाँ पर है 2,40,000. मेरा actual rent in this case is, let us say, 25,000 rupees per month. So 25,000 rupees मुझे मिलना था, लेकिन 2 महीने का रेंट जो है वो अनरियलाइज्ड रह गया. बराबर. So 50,000 rupees मुझे मिला नहीं है. 2,50,000 जो 10 महीने का रेंट है that I have received. So my RER in this case is 2,40,000. My actual rent received or receivable after reducing the component of unrealized rent is 2,50,000. What will be my GAV in this case? My GAV in this case will be 2,50,000 because it is higher of RER and actual rent received or received. तो ये छोटे illustration में मेरा gross annual value हो जाएगा 2,50,000. मतलब 50,000 का अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट जो मैंने रेड्यूस किया कंप्यूटेशन के दौरान वो मेरे हाथ में टैक्स नहीं हुआ है क्योंकि मेरे हाथ में जो अमाउंट टैक्स हुई दैट वाज 2,50,000 which was post deduction of the unrealized rent. अब समझो 2 साल के बाद वो टेनेंट मुझे वो 50,000 रुपए आके लौटा देता है। अब ये 50,000 रुपए मेरे हाथ में टैक्स होंगे इन द ईयर इन विच आई रिसीव इट, बराबर, in the year in which I receive it, because no amount of this was taxed earlier in my hands, क्योंकि मेरा GAV था 2,50,000 which was my actual rent received or receivable. ये 50,000 रुपए जब मैं टैक्स करूंगी as unrealized rent recovered in the year of recovery, उसमें से मुझे अलाउ होगा स्टैंडर्ड डिडक्शन एट द रेट ऑफ 30%. ये फर्स्ट सिनेरियो है. For the sake of convenience of everybody listening to me, I will just repeat this small example. Let us say my RER in this example is 2,40,000. My actual rent received or receivable is 2,50,000 after reducing unrealized rent of 50,000 rupees at the time of determining GAV. So my GAV here will be higher of 2,40,000 and 2,50,000, which is 2,50,000. So इस illustration में मेरा GAV हो जाता है मेरा actual rent 2.5 लाख रुपया after reducing unrealized rent of 50,000 rupees. उस साल का कैलकुलेशन मैं कर लेती हूँ, उस साल की कहानी खत्म. अब 2 साल बाद ये unrealized rent मुझे रिसीव होता है. I receive this 50,000 rupees from the tenant in coming 2 years. Now I have to go back to the year in which this rent was actually due. जैसे 2 साल पहले अपने वाले साल में समझो 1920 प्रीवियस ईयर में मुझे चेक करना है कि उस साल मैंने कौन से अमाउंट पे टैक्स दिया था. आंसर है 2,50,000 जिसमें ये 50,000 रुपए इंक्लूडेड नहीं थे. तो इन द ईयर ऑफ रिकवरी ऑफ अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट दिस 50,000 विल बी चार्ज टू टैक्स, लेकिन उसमें से मैं स्टैंडर्ड डिडक्शन का स्टैंडर्ड डिडक्शन अलाउ करूंगी, उसके बाद ये टैक्स हो जाएगा. Coming to a second example of this concept, ध्यान से सुनिए, फिर कुछ डाउट्स है तो हम उन्हें ले सकते हैं when we go to the doubt solving session in few minutes time. सेकेंड इलस्ट्रेशन में सुनिए, मैं मेरा एक्चुअल रेंट अमाउंट सेम रखती हूँ 2,50,000, लेकिन मैं मेरा RER अमाउंट चेंज कर रही हूँ. तो अभी वाले एग्जाम्पल में मेरा RER हो जाता है 2,80,000. मेरा एक्चुअल रेंट रिसीव्ड और रिसीवेबल है 2,50,000 after reducing 50,000 rupees of unrealized rent. So for previous year 1920, my RER is 2,80,000. My actual rent received or receivable is 2,50,000. So my gross annual value here is going to be 2,80,000. Notional income tax हो रहा है, क्योंकि GAV का फॉर्मूला ही कुछ इस तरह से है कि higher of RER and actual rent is going to be. Another important point you should note here is आपका 2.5 लाख का जो actual rent received और receivable था, उसमें से 50,000 जो unrealized rent है वो उसमें included नहीं है, लेकिन आपके हाथ में जो टैक्स हुआ है that is 2,80,000 which includes 30,000 of the unrealized rent on which the assessee is required to pay tax. So अभी 2 साल बाद जब मुझे 50,000 वो टेनेंट लाके देगा, ये लो भाई आपका अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट, तो मुझे क्या चेक करना है कि प्रीवियस ईयर 1920 के दौरान वो 50,000 अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट में से कितना अमाउंट था जो टैक्स हो गया था. कैसे पता चलेगा? प्रीवियस ईयर 1920 में देखिए आपने RER क्या ऑफर किया था 2,80,000 और आपका एक्चुअल रेंट क्या था 2,50,000. 2,50,000 आपने कैलकुलेट किया था, ये 50,000 रुपया लेस करने के बाद उसके बावजूद आपने टैक्स पे किया था 2,80,000 पे जो आपका RER था. इसका मतलब ये है कि 50,000 के अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट के कंपोनेंट में से 30,000 पे आप ऑलरेडी टैक्स दे चुके हो. तो आज जब ये 50,000 की रिकवरी होती है, आपको टैक्स देना है सिर्फ 20,000 रुपए पे. उसमें से भी आप स्टैंडर्ड डिडक्शन जो 30% ऑफ द NAV है, इस केस में 30% ऑफ 20,000 वो रेड्यूस करोगे एंड बैलेंस अमाउंट आप टैक्स के लिए ऑफर करोगे. आई होप आपको ये दोनों इलस्ट्रेशन से अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट का टैक्स ट्रीटमेंट पता चला हो. So unrealized rent which is reduced from the annual value, it will be charged to tax if it is recovered subsequently. Any amount which was already forming a part of your gross annual value, that will not be taxed again. ये बैलेंस अमाउंट की जो रिकवरी हुई, जैसे सेकंड वाले एग्जांपल में ये 20,000 जो रिकवर हुए, उस पे आप स्टैंडर्ड डिडक्शन एट द रेट ऑफ 30% ले सकते हो। सो दिस इज अबाउट अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट। इसमें एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात ये है कि मान लीजिए जिस साल में आपको ये अनरियलाइज्ड रेंट रिकवर हुआ, उस साल आप उस प्रॉपर्टी के ओनर नहीं थे, आपने ये प्रॉपर्टी बेच दी ड्यूरिंग द इंटरिम पीरियड, फिर भी ये अमाउंट आपके हाथ में टैक्स होगा under the head income from house property. So this amount is taxable to the assessee even if he is not the owner in the year of receipt of such unrealized rent in subsequent years. Moving on to the next concept, ये भी similar है unrealized rent के जैसे ही, इसीलिए हम इसको साथ में कवर करेंगे, बस concept में फर्क है, tax treatment on subsequent recovery is the same. तो जैसे मैंने कहा unrealized rent used to be the bad debts of IFHP, arrears of rent is on a slightly different footing. Arrears हम तब कहते हैं जब there has been a retrospective increase in my rent in a subsequent year which is applicable from a previous year. So जैसे मैंने आज समझो previous year 1920 में मुझे पता चला हो कि जो रेंट में रिसीव कर रही थी for the previous year 1819 वो भी increase हो गया। तो जैसे I was receiving 20,000 rupees per month in previous year 1819, in the previous year 1920 we decide that rent for 1819 is also going to be increased to 25,000. तो यहाँ पर क्या हो जाता है, वो 5,000 rupees per month जो मुझे increase है, that is going to be treated as arrears. अब arrears का ये meaning होता है, so it is an amount which is received to the assessee on account of a retrospective increase in my rent figures of a particular previous year. So arrears of rent जो होते हैं वो पहले कभी टैक्स नहीं हुए होंगे as a part of your actual rent received or receivable, क्योंकि आपका रेंट अब जाकर पड़ा। तो जिस साल में आपको ये arrears रिसीव होते हैं उसी साल में आपको ऑफर करना है as IFHP, and of course the deduction under section 24, the standard deduction at 30% of your NAV is allowed from this particular amount as well. Also, these arrears will be chargeable to tax even though assessee is not the owner of the property in the year of receipt. So just to tell you my example of unrealized rent again modified to suit अपना arrears का concept. Suppose previous year 1819 में आपका actual rent पूरे साल का रहा होगा 2,40,000, उस साल आपका RER रहा होगा 2 lakh rupees. तो आपने actually 2,40,000 पे tax pay किया which was your GA. अब जाकर आपको 60,000 rupees arrears मिलते हैं pertaining to previous year 1819. ये पूरा 60,000 rupees आपके हाथ में टैक्स होगा in the year of receipt after allowing a standard deduction at the rate of 30% of NAV. अब इसी एग्जांपल को मैं क्विकली मॉडिफाई करती हूँ, राइट? समझो वो दौरान प्रीवियस ईयर 1819 में मेरा रीजनेबल एक्सपेक्टेड रेंट रहा होगा 2,80,000 और मेरा एक्चुअल रेंट रहा होगा 2,40,000. तो उस साल मैंने एज GAV टैक्स किया होगा 2,80,000. अब करंट ईयर में मुझे 60,000 रुपीज मिल जाते हैं एज अरियर्स ऑफ प्रीवियस ईयर 1819. अब जाके मुझे एनालाइज करना है कि उस साल मेरा RER क्या था, तो वो था 2,80,000. उस साल मेरा एक्चुअल रेंट क्या था 2,40,000. माने 40,000 रुपीज एक्स्ट्रा पे मैंने टैक्स दे दिया था उस साल क्योंकि मेरा RER मेरे एक्चुअल रेंट से ज्यादा था. तो इस बार जब मुझे 60,000 रिसीव होते हैं, वो 60,000 में से मुझे पूरे 60 पे टैक्स पे करने की जरूरत नहीं है. मुझे कितने पे टैक्स पे करना पड़ेगा? 60 माइनस 40,000 ऑन विच आई हैव पेड टैक्स अर्लियर. तो 20,000 रुपीज जो हैं वो इस साल टैक्स होंगे आफ्टर अलाउइंग अ स्टैंडर्ड डिडक्शन एट द रेट ऑफ 30%. So this is the concept of arrears of rent. Again, even if the assessee is no longer owner of the property, that amount is going to be taxed in his hands under the head income from house property. So अभी दो छोटे कॉन्सेप्ट्स बचते हैं यहाँ पर जो मैं कवर करूंगी, और एक छोटा सा कॉन्सेप्ट जिसको हम टच एंड गो करेंगे. को ओनर्स का कॉन्सेप्ट एक है, कंपोजिट रेंट का कॉन्सेप्ट है जो हम क्विकली डिटेल में कवर करेंगे, एंड डीम्ड ओनर जो है वो हम ऊपर से जस्ट रिवाइज करेंगे. बट उसके पहले आई वुड लाइक टू ब्रेक फॉर टेकिंग द डाउट्स. So I think Rushikesh ji, आप अगर सुन रहे हैं तो just guide us how to go further. There are quite a few queries जो मैं मेरे chat box में देख रही हूँ. I'll just try and resolve few of them which I can see.
Hi Prachi, Ravish here.
Yes, Ravish.
Rishikesh battery was low, so I'm the host.
No
It was a
problem. Yeah.
wonderful session, by the way.
Yeah,
You
thank
reminded me my chemistry teacher. She used to
okay.
teach like in detail and like that only. Uh, what what I realized that the income tax question will be on salary on sorry house property will be the recent change in section 24, I guess.
Correct.
The carry
So,
forward of
yeah.
the carry
So,
forward of interest. If you can, brief on that.
Yes. Ravish, I have two queries here, so I'll address
Yes.
them and I'll come back to your query also. I just
Sure.
opened my chat window for this. So I think vacancy concept we have taken up. I believe that is clear. Unrealized rent also we have taken up. So there were few queries which came in my illustration part only. So I'm sure Heenal and there's one fellow called as writer learner. I hope you're clear with your doubts pertaining to unrealized rent and arrears of rent and tax treatment thereof. We have just discussed them. So there is one question which comes up. There is one Abhijit Narsimhan who's asked this question. Will the interest on the secondary loan will come under the limit of 30,000 and 2 lakhs? So I believe this doubt is with regards to the poser which I had put up. If I take a new loan to repay the original loan and I pay interest thereon, what will be the treatment for that interest? That interest will be allowed as a deduction. And yes, Abhijit, that interest will also be subject to the limit of 30,000 and 2 lakh rupees as the case may be. So that was one question. Okay, there is one question from one particular person. If a person has incurred 1 lakh rupees as pre-construction interest, which is divided in 5 equal parts after completion of construction, if the assessee pre-closes the loan after 2 years of completion, can he still claim the pre-construction interest for another 3 years? Very nice question, I should say. So just I'll elaborate the question for the benefit of others who might not have followed what I read. So this person is asking me that suppose I took a loan from a bank and for such period when my property was under construction, I have paid 1 lakh rupees as interest to the bank. Okay. Then my property got completed and I started claiming this pre-construction interest the way we do in 5 equal installments. And after some years, maybe 2 years after completion, the assessee decides to pay off the loan in advance. उसके पास कहीं से लॉटरी लगती है, पैसा आता है और वो लोन प्री क्लोज कर देता है. तो ये बंदा पूछ रहा है कि can I still claim pre-construction interest? Answer is yes, because आपको ये pre-construction, as long as you own the property, you can claim the deduction because this pre-construction interest pertains to a period when you were not in a position to claim deduction in respect of the interest on account of the property not being in existence. तो ये 5 साल का जो टेन्योर है जिसपे आप ये इंस्टॉलमेंट्स क्लेम कर सकते हो उसका आप डिडक्शन ले सकते हो इवन दो यू हैव प्री क्लोज द लोन प्री क्लोज करने पे नेचुरली जो करंट ईयर इंटरेस्ट है उसका आप यहाँ पर डिडक्शन नहीं ले सकते. अच्छा, प्रॉपर्टी अगर बिक जाती है तो ऑब्वियसली चार्जिंग सेक्शन ही नहीं रहेगा तो हम लोन का कोई इंटरेस्ट का डिडक्शन नहीं ले सकते. So to answer that, the question is from Baiju Shah, and yes, you can claim the pre-construction interest for another 3 years, even though you have pre-closed the loan after 2 years of completion of property, of the completion of property. So I think these were the queries which I found relevant, which were put up in the chat window. Any other queries you have at your end? I'll just come to your query, Ravish, of the interest part. So अभी amendment जो हुआ है वो हुआ है in the number of self-occupied properties. तो अभी हम 2 सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाइड प्रॉपर्टीज का बेनिफिट ले सकते हैं. कहने का मतलब 2 सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाइड प्रॉपर्टीज के लिए हम एनएवी नील रख सकते हैं. उसका जो करस्पॉन्डिंग अमेंडमेंट हुआ है वो हुआ है इंटरेस्ट वाले सेक्शन में. तो डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट कि हम 2 प्रॉपर्टीज का एनएवी नील ले पा रहे हैं, जो सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाइड प्रॉपर्टी के रिस्पेक्ट में इंटरेस्ट का डिडक्शन होता है जो हमारे केस में 2 लाख पे रिस्ट्रिक्टेड है, अज्यूमिंग कि ये लोन परचेज या कंस्ट्रक्शन के लिए लिया हो, वो 2 लाख उन्होंने कांस्टेंट रखा है. तो 24 में अमेंडमेंट इस तरह से आया है कि even though the number of self-occupied properties which you can occupy and claim benefit in the form of NAV being nil have been increased, the amount of interest which you can claim as a part of that self-occupied property will be restricted to 2 lakhs only. उसको 2+2 नहीं करना है, उसको 2 lakhs पे हमको constant रखना है, वो change है. जहां तक कुछ कैरी फॉरवर्ड का आप पूछ रहे थे, तो प्री कंस्ट्रक्शन इंटरेस्ट वो एक ही एलिमेंट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट है जो हम कैरी फॉरवर्ड कर सकते हैं इक्वली 5 साल तक हम उसका डिडक्शन ले सकते हैं. और इस पॉइंट पे मैं एक बात क्लियर करना चाहूंगी कि अगर हम सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाइड प्रॉपर्टीज की बात कर रहे हैं जहां पर लिमिट है 2 लाख रुपए का इंटरेस्ट के डिडक्शन पे, तो ये 2 लाख रुपए के लिमिट में क्या क्या इंक्लूडेड है, तो इसमें आपका करंट ईयर इंटरेस्ट इंक्लूडेड है एंड आपका 1/5 पोर्शन ऑफ प्री कंस्ट्रक्शन इंटरेस्ट भी इसी में इंक्लूडेड होता है. So any other questions which you people have, the two of you who are managing the show from your WhatsApp and YouTube, you can ask me. On the YouTube chat window, I cannot right now see any other unanswered questions. To all the students who are viewing us live, if there are any questions, we have a 5-7 minutes window here. You can put them up and I will try my best to answer them.
Good morning,
ma'am. Prachi, what questions student must expect from institute? What will be the composition? What will be their asking? They, just a tip for student.
Sure. So typically, if we see, usually the first question is generally a combination of salary and PGBP. House property pay, this time there is an amendment and quite a significant amendment. One of the illustrations which I have picked up from the module is one particular question जहाँ पर ये SOP वाला concept tackle किया है. So students को मैं ये कहना चाहूँगी at this juncture, though I don't want to, give any kind of importance or anything, we don't do that. But yes, because the amendment of number of SOPs being increased is a significant one, we can expect some small illustration or so in our paper. IFHP usually तो वो जो smaller questions होते हैं उसका हिस्सा होता है, जो बड़ा compulsory question होता है वो usually PGBP salary based होता है. तो IFHP पे हम एक small question शायद anticipate कर सके based on the amendments. Also कुछ MCQs जो है, जैसे ये छोटी छोटी concepts है कि interest का deduction रिस्ट्रिक्ट किया गया है, 2 lakhs मैक्सिमम कैप है, ये जो सारे छोटे छोटे इश्यूज हैं इनको लेकर हम कुछ एमसीक्यूज भी यहाँ पर एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं. सो अगर मुझे पूछोगे तो IFHP में यस यू कैन एक्सपेक्ट अ स्मॉलर इलस्ट्रेशन, मे बी 6-8 मार्क का एक छोटा इंडिपेंडेंट क्वेश्चन आ जाए, वो हम कोशिश करेंगे यहाँ पर लेने के लिए जो हमारे मॉड्यूल में से है. यस Yes, students, any other question who are viewing us? जाग रहे हो सब या सो रहे हो? जैसे हम लाइव लेक्चर में हमेशा कहते हैं, बहुत ज्यादा थियरी हो जाता है तो थोड़ा सा ड्राउजी हो जाता है पब्लिक. कुछ क्वेश्चंस है तो पुट अप फास्ट गाइस, वी विल ट्राई टू कवर देम. काफी सारे क्वेश्चंस है ऋषिकेश इस चीज को लेकर के, वेदर द रिकॉर्डिंग्स विल बी प्रोवाइडेड एंड वेदर द मटेरियल विल बी अवेलेबल. आप अपने एंड से क्लैरिफाई करना चाहोगे इस चीज को?
हाँ, श्योर मैम.
हाँ.
Yes, these lectures will be available recorded on the YouTube or the any other platform which we will be using every day. And PPTs which ma'am is using, notes which ma'am is using, revision notes will be shared to your email IDs, registered email IDs. So don't take tension of that. Don't worry for that. Thank you.
रवीश, आपके साइड से कुछ क्वेश्चंस या क्वेरीज है जो आप चाहते हैं मैं यहाँ पे टैकल करूं?
I think you have covered all the details of this house property. So there's nothing much left in that. Still, you have answered all the queries. I don't have any questions on my chat.
So nothing on your mobile or handheld devices?
Yeah, I am
because
just...
जो यहाँ पे live chat window में दिख रहे थे वो काफी तो during the lecture वाले queries थे जो I think self resolve हो गए.
You have already covered, all the aspect. Yeah, you have already covered.
एक दो जो questions थे वो अलग से I think cover हो चुके हैं. So I think we'll wait for a minute more. अगर किसी को कुछ पूछना है तो they might put up on the chat window. Otherwise we'll proceed.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
Yes.
Well, I'll use this platform to ensure that all the students please make please ensure that you read all the amendments. You read all the amendments. It's very important. It's very important to go through all the amendments because most of the questions will come from amendments.
Okay, I see one question coming up. So I'll just quickly read it. If the interest on two SOPs is 1,80,000 and 2 lakh respectively, is there any provision regarding deduction of the maximum interest, or the assessee has the choice on how the interest is deducted between the SOP? So this question is by one Abhijit Narsimhan again. Okay, interesting question, Abhijit. So what you're trying to say is, let us say house property 1 and house property 2, ऐसे दो SOP है मेरे पास, and 1,80,000 and 2 lakh is the interest which I am paying during the year. So there is no, there is any provision regarding the maximum deduction of maximum interest in this case would be in respect of both the properties, cumulatively your interest would be restricted to 2 lakhs. So one possibility is I take that entire 2 lakhs of property where the interest amount is 2 lakhs, or I take 1,80,000 of the first property and top it up by 20,000 of the other property. Mathematically, it is not really going to make any difference to me, because in my computation, my NAV of both the properties will be nil, and my maximum interest deductible will be restricted to 2 lakhs as far as these two SOPs are concerned. Whether the assessee has the choice on how the interest is deducted between the SOP. So see, as far as the way I'm putting it up in my computation goes, both the properties computation will begin from NAV being nil. So typically I would rather not have any choice per se that what properties interest I take first, you know, क्योंकि जब हम इसको compute करेंगे मेरा computation शुरू होगा NAV nil से less both the deductions, जिसमें interest का deduction will be restricted at 2 lakhs. So I don't think that would really make any difference. There is one more question from one Paresh Nanda. It is said, suppose current year's interest is 60,000 and pre-construction interest is 1,50,000. Then interest is deducted up to 2 lakhs only. So Paresh, I am assuming this 1,50,000 which you mention as pre-construction interest is the 1/5 component which you are mentioning and not the whole of pre-construction interest. So if this is 1/5 component, which is 1,50,000, and your current year's interest is 60,000, your maximum interest deducted will be 2 lakhs if your property is a self-occupied property. If your property is a let out or a deemed to be let out property, then there is no maximum cap on the amount of interest you can claim as deduction. Jinali here is asking a question, can you provide one more example for pre-construction interest? So Jinali will be doing question number 3 from the ICAI module, which covers the concept of pre-construction interest. I hope that satisfies the query. So any other questions, guys, or we can move on? I think Rishikesh and Ravish, let us continue with the session. So,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, that will ensure that we finish it in good time, no? So justice is done to the content. Yes, yes.
Madam, I will leave now.
Okay, okay, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so going further. So that brings us to the next concept of co-owners. So this is again a very small concept. We'll be covering one illustration on this as well. Okay, there's one more question coming up, Preeti, but I think I'll take it towards the end of the explanation now. Please excuse me. Let us finish these two concepts and I'll be coming to all the questions that are being put up now. Students who are listening, please put up your queries here on the live chat option of YouTube. I will be taking them up once we are done with the explanation. Thank you. Okay. Coming to the concept of co-owners. So this is a scenario wherein a property is owned by two or more people. So they could be two brothers or relatives who are co-owning a property. There are two scenarios possible here. The shares in which these people are owning the property is ascertainable, and the shares in which these people are owning the property is unascertainable. So let us say there are two brothers A and B and they own 50% of a property. So that is an example जहाँ पर shares ascertainable हैं. और जैसे समझो दो भाई हैं A and B जिनको विरासत में एक प्रॉपर्टी मिली है and they are assessed to income arising from that property jointly, कुछ specific share दोनों के बीच में allocate नहीं किया गया है, that is a situation where the shares are unascertainable. तो हमें इसको कैसे, अगर ऐसा situation एग्जाम में आता है in the form of a question, हमें इसको कैसे टैकल करना है? So मान लीजिए ये प्रॉपर्टी जो है जिसके ये लोग को ओनर्स हैं वो एलओपी है या डीएलओपी है. तो अगर ये प्रॉपर्टी एलओपी या डीएलओपी है एंड एक से ज्यादा ओनर्स हैं, तो इस प्रॉपर्टी का एक सिंगल कंप्यूटेशन करेंगे हम जब हम क्वेश्चन सॉल्व कर रहे हैं, एंड इसका जो आंसर आता है उसको हम डिवाइड करेंगे in the certain shares of the co-owners. तो जैसे मेरे एग्जांपल में ए एंड बी दो भाई थे, उनको कुछ रेंटल इनकम डिराइव हुआ, तो वो पर्टिकुलर रेंटल इनकम आप पहले कंप्यूट कर लीजिए एज एलओपी एंड डीएलओपी, एंड फिर उसको आप उनके रिस्पेक्टिव शेयर्स जो मेरे इलस्ट्रेशन में 50% था उसमें डिवाइड कर लीजिए. अगर ये प्रॉपर्टी एसओपी है, यहाँ पर चीजें इंटरेस्टिंग हो जाती हैं. अगर ये प्रॉपर्टी जिसके ये को ओनर्स हैं वो एसओपी है, तो यहाँ पर हम हर को ओनर के लिए एक सेपरेट कंप्यूटेशन करेंगे. इसका रीजन ये है बिकॉज एवरी को ओनर इज एंटाइटल्ड टू अ सेपरेट डिडक्शन ऑफ 2 लाख रुपीज in respect of the self-occupied property wherever any loan is taken for the purchase or construction, or 30,000 rupees in case any loan is taken for the repairs, renewal or reconstruction of the property. So the two scenarios here are if the co-owner's share is ascertainable and the property is LOP, you make one single computation and then divide it amongst the respective shares. If the property is SOP, you make separate computations because we have to take the benefit of interest separately for each co-owners. डीम्ड ओनर का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है हम यहाँ पर ज्यादा डिटेल में नहीं जाएंगे, जस्ट उसका फर्स्ट एस्पेक्ट जो है उसको ब्रीफली कवर कर लेंगे. दिस इज सेक्शन 27 ऑफ द एक्ट. सो यहाँ पर ऐसा सिचुएशन है कि लीगली द ओनर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी इज वन पर्सन, but income tax assumes some other person to be the deemed owner of this particular property. So any individual who transfers any property otherwise than for adequate consideration to his or her spouse or minor child, then that person is deemed to be the owner of the house property so transferred. तो जैसे समझो मिस्टर ए है, वो एक प्रॉपर्टी अपने वाइफ को गिफ्ट कर देते हैं, ऐसे ही सामने पैसा नहीं लेते हैं, ना ही उनका डिवोर्स हो रहा है. So in that case it is neither in an agreement to live apart nor for adequate consideration. In that situation, that Mr. A is deemed to be the owner from income tax perspective, even though the legal owner of that property is now Mrs. A. तो इसमें implication क्या है? तो इस प्रॉपर्टी में से अगर कल उठकर कुछ रेंटल इनकम डिराइव हो रहा है, तो वो रेंटल इनकम टैक्स होगा मिस्टर ए के हाथ में, ना कि मिसेस ए के हाथ में. उसे हम कंप्यूट करेंगे मिसेस ए के पर्सपेक्टिव से, बट फाइनली जब हम उस पर टैक्स लेने की बारी आती है तो वो टैक्स होना है मिस्टर ए के हाथ. That is just one small aspect of deemed owner which I will cover here. बाकी सब है वहाँ पर 12 years से ज्यादा से लीज के कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स, HUF, इम्पार्टेबल एस्टेट, वो सारी चीजें कवर्ड हैं जो हम यहाँ पर at this juncture नहीं लेंगे. Just this much is enough for the purpose of revision. So going further, this is I would say a very important concept in composite rent. बहुत interesting भी है. मैं चाहती हूँ आप सब लोग जो इसे सुन रहे हैं, okay, there are two questions with regards to co-owner and deemed owner. I will come to them once I am done with this concept of composite rent. So this is a very very interesting concept और बहुत मजा आता है इसको सिखाने में भी और समझाने में भी जब हम क्लासरूम में होते हैं. I'm sure you will understand this. अच्छा, इस पे और एक चीज, you can expect some smaller MCQs or case study like questions springing out from this concept. So typically, you know what, under the head income from house property, what we are covering usually is only rental income which we receive from property which is given on rent. But there are several instances wherein there can be certain facilities or assets which are given on hire along with the property. तो उन cases में क्या होता है, जो rent आप receive करते हैं वो सिर्फ property के लिए नहीं होता है. It is composite in the sense that property के rent के साथ साथ उसके अंदर सारे assets और facilities का rent भी covered होता है. तो यहाँ पर हम दो scenarios में ये concept को understand करेंगे. So wherein certain facilities are provided along with the property and certain assets are provided along with the property. So let us first come to the situation wherein certain facilities are provided along with the property given on hire. I will explain it to you along with an example. Suppose I have a fully furnished flat which I am giving on rent. So वो flat के अंदर एयर कंडीशनिंग प्रोवाइड की गई है, सारा फर्नीचर प्रोवाइड किया हुआ है, हर चीज जो जरूरी है जैसे रेफ्रिजरेटर है, डाइनिंग टेबल है, एक्सेट्रा, टेलीविजन सेट्स है, सारी चीजें वहां पर प्रोवाइड की गई है इन दैट पर्टिकुलर फ्लैट. ओके, या suppose I have a fully furnished. So and in this case I have made a rent agreement with my tenant कि ये फ्लैट जो मैंने रेंट पे दिया हुआ है, ये फ्लैट का रेंट जो है वो है 60,000 रुपीज पर मंथ, और ये जो तरह तरह की फैसिलिटीज मैंने प्रोवाइड की है उनका रेंट आएगा 20,000 रुपीज पर मंथ. ऐसे करके 80,000 रुपीज पर मंथ का हमने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट बनाया हुआ है. So I'm talking of the first situation wherein facilities are provided and bifurcation of rent. Bifurcation माने division of rent into rent for property and rent for facilities is available. So इस scenario में क्या होना है कि whatever is the rent which pertains to property will be taxed under the head income from house property. Whatever is the rent which pertain to facilities will be taxed under the head income from other sources. This is when facilities are provided and bifurcation of rent is available. अब सपोज कीजिए मैंने ये फ्लैट रेंट पे दिया है, लेकिन मैंने ऐसा कोई बाइफरकेशन नहीं किया कि इतना रेंट फैसिलिटीज का है, इतना रेंट प्रॉपर्टी का है. मैंने सिंगल वन शॉट अरेंजमेंट किया है कि 60,000 इज 80,000 ये पूरे पैकेज का रेंट है जिसमें घर और ये सारी फैसिलिटीज आपको दी जा रही है. तो ये सिचुएशन है सेकेंड वाली अंडर द क्राइटेरिया फैसिलिटीज प्रोवाइडेड, जहां पर की बाइफरकेशन ऑफ रेंट इज नॉट अवेलेबल. अब यहाँ पर आपको क्या करना है कि 80,000 का जो टोटल रेंट है उसमें से जो भी कॉस्ट लैंडलॉर्ड ने इनकर की होगी फॉर प्रोवाइडिंग दीज फैसिलिटीज, जैसे वो एयर कंडीशनिंग फैसिलिटी हो, फर्नीचर फिक्सचर्स हो, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का बिल हो जो वो पे कर रहा है, ये सब चीजें प्रोवाइड करने में जो भी कॉस्ट लैंडलॉर्ड ने इनकर की होगी उस कॉस्ट को आपको एक्सक्लूड करना है. बचा हुआ रेंट आपको टैक्स करना है अंडर द हेड इनकम फ्रॉम हाउस प्रॉपर्टी. सो दैट इज द केस वेर इन फैसिलिटीज आर प्रोवाइडेड. सेकेंड सिचुएशन यहाँ पर है जहाँ के जबकि एसेट्स हैव बीन गिवन ऑन हायर. तो यहाँ पर भी दो सिचुएशंस पॉसिबल है. लेटिंग आउट इज सेपरेबल एंड लेटिंग आउट इज इनसेपरेबल. अब इसको मैं एक एग्जांपल के साथ एक्सप्लेन करूंगी. आप विजुअलाइज कीजिए एक सिनेमा हॉल को. तो जब मैं किसी सिनेमा हॉल को हायर पे देती हूँ तो कैन यू एनविसाज अ सिनेरियो वेयर इन द सिनेमा हॉल इज लेट आउट विदाउट द स्क्रीन, विदाउट द स्पीकर्स, विदाउट द चेयर्स एक्सेट्रा? नो. सो सिनेमा हॉल, ऑडिटोरियम, क्लासरूम, ये सब चीजें जब मैं लेट आउट करती हूँ दे आर इन सच अ मैनर दैट द लेटिंग आउट ऑफ असेट्स इज इनसेपरेबल फ्रॉम द लेटिंग आउट ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी. प्रॉपर्टी के अंदर जो सारे असेट्स कंप्राइज्ड हैं उनको अलग अलग लेट आउट करना पॉसिबल नहीं है, इसीलिए हम बोलते हैं कि लेटिंग आउट इज इनसेपरेबल. अब सेकेंड एग्जाम्पल जो मैं यहाँ दूंगी वो आप इमेजिन कर लीजिए जैसे किसी की शादी हो रही है और वो शादी का हॉल किराए पे. तो हो सकता है कई जगह पर ऐसे ऑप्शन होते हैं कि आप खाली हॉल ले लीजिएगा, बाकी जो चेयर्स है, केटरर है, कूलिंग सिस्टम है, डेकोरेटर्स है, वो सब आप अलग से ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं. तो दैट इज अ सिनेरियो वेयर इन लेटिंग आउट इज सेपरेबल. या आपको कोई सेमिनार वगैरह रखना है तो आप जाकर किसी लायंस क्लब, कम्युनिटी हॉल या ऐसा कोई हॉल ले लेते हैं जहां पर आपको खाली स्पेस मिल रही है. तो वो इलस्ट्रेशन हो गया जहां पर लेटिंग आउट ऑफ असेट्स इज सेपरेबल फ्रॉम लेटिंग आउट ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी. तो आई होप ये दोनों बाइफरकेशंस आप सबके दिमाग में क्लियर है. लेट अस कम टू द सेकंड point in the tree diagram here where assets are given on hire and letting out is inseparable. Inseparable माने ऑडिटोरियम, सिनेमा थिएटर एक्सेट्रा. सो जब लेटिंग आउट इनसेपरेबल होती है तो मुझे जो रेंट होता है वो मुझे टैक्स करना है अंडर द हेड पीजीबीपी और ईफोस एज द केस में. अब एज द केस में भी मैं इसलिए बोल रही हूँ क्योंकि एसएससी का अगर रूटीन बिजनेस है इस तरह की प्रॉपर्टीज हायर पे देना तो वो अमाउंट टैक्स हो जाएगा पीजीबीपी में. अगर वन ऑफ अ केस में एसएससी ने ये अमाउंट टैक्स किया है तो वो अमाउंट टैक्स हो जाएगा अंडर द हेड इनकम फ्रॉम अदर सोर्सेज के अंदर. So that is the scenario wherein letting out is inseparable. Coming to the situation wherein letting out of assets is separable. Okay, coming to the situation wherein letting out of assets is separable from letting out of property. So this is a scenario where I spoke of, wherein you take up one particular hall or room on rent and you choose to bring your own assets therein. So in this context, whatever is the rent which you receive from property will be taxed under the head income from house property. Whatever rent you receive from letting out of assets will be taxable under the head PGBP or EFOS as the case. So I'll just repeat this entire thing again very quickly. So under composite rent, there could be two options. One where facilities are provided and one where assets are given on hire. Wherein facilities are provided, there could be two scenarios. Bifurcation of rent is available. In that situation, whatever is rent pertaining to property goes under income from house property. Whatever is the rent which pertains to facilities given along with that property, like air conditioning, maybe electricity, furniture, fixtures, that goes to income from other sources. Suppose in the event that bifurcation of this rent is not possible into rent for properties and rent for facilities, in this case, whatever rent is being received by the assessee, from that we have to reduce the cost of providing these facilities, and the balance rent is charged under income from house property. The second scenario is wherein assets are given on hire along with the property. So in that case also there are two possibilities. Letting out of the assets is inseparable from letting out of the property. So here I gave the examples of cinema, theaters, auditoriums, etc. In this case, the entire rent is to be included under PGBP or EFOS as the case may be for the respective assessee. The second scenario here is wherein the letting out of assets is separable from letting out of properties. In this case, the rent which pertains to property part will be taxed under income from house property. Rent which pertains to the assets part will be taxed under PGBP or income from other sources. So this is the whole concept of composite rent. I'm sure all of you must have understood it. Now I have a few questions which have come up on my chat window. I will just take them up first and then we will go to the illustrations. Okay, so first question from where we left is from Preeti, where if we have borrowed loan for repairs and it is borrowed before 99, then in this interest deduction for SOP is restricted to 40,000 or we can claim 80,000. So Preeti, if at all we have taken a loan for repairs and it is taken prior to 1/4/1999, the maximum amount of interest which is deductible is 30,000 rupees. Even if you have more than one self-occupied property, the maximum amount of deduction in respect of interest in these cases will be restricted to 30,000 only. Second question is from Divya. If I have taken a loan from bank by putting one house property on mortgage to purchase a new house property, can I take deduction of interest? Yes, Divya, you can take deduction of interest in computation of income from the new property that you have taken. Assuming that the property which you have mortgaged is a SOP in this question, right? Next question is from Paresh. Each co-owner will get 2 lakhs interest benefit. Yes, Paresh, each co-owner, if the property is a SOP, is entitled to an interest deduction of 2 lakh rupees, provided the loan is taken for the purchase of for the purpose of purchase or construction. Okay. One more question. If it is a minor married daughter, so I think this question is in the context of deemed owner part, which we covered. So writer learner, minor married daughter is also covered here because it is just a question of giving a property on transferring a property by a person. So this is what he is referring to. So even if an individual transfers any property otherwise and for adequate consideration to a minor child, that part will be covered here. Okay, someone is asking me to talk in English, so I'm alternating between both the languages. I hope it is suitable for most of us. So with this, friends, I have covered in detail the concepts of income from house property. At this juncture, I will just highlight all the amendments here. So the first amendment which we took up was in respect of the benefit of SOPs being extended to more than one properties. So we have 2 properties here which are now covered by the ambit of section 23(2). So NAV nil can be levied for 2 properties now. Next, the corresponding amendment here is the deduction in respect of interest on loan will be restricted to 2 lakhs for both the properties taken together. And the third amendment here is for those assessees who are holding such property as stock and trade. Okay, so I am a developer or a builder, and I am having certain unsold properties lying as my stock in trade for a period of 2 years from the end of the financial year in which I receive the completion certificate. I can take the annual value of these properties as nil. After the expiry of 2 years, these properties will be treated as DLOP, even though these properties are my inventory or stock in trade. I hope we have revised the amendments. We have revised the head of income completely. Now I would just throw up the questions which we are going to be taking up. So I have identified a few illustrations from the module which we would be covering up for today's session. So what I'll now be doing is after we note down these numbers, I request all of you to open your modules, or for those of you who are viewing it in soft copy, I would like all of you to turn to the May 2020 material available on the BOS portal, and we would be discussing these three or four questions. So one is question number 3, which is based on the pre-construction concept. One is question number 5, which is based on co-owners concept. I would, however, first be starting with illustration number 8, which is based on those amendment version of 2 SOPs being taken up as NAV nil, and the third one being DLOP. And then we'll be doing a small, giving a small homework, which is the question number 11. So these three illustrations I'll be taking up. Now I request all of you to just access your material. In the meanwhile, I will also open up the material on my laptop here. Just give me a minute. Okay, I have come to illustration number 8 on page number 4.143 of the material. I will just share the screen for the same. Okay, so we are on illustration number 8, page number 4.413. I hope all of you have managed to put up the relevant question at your end also. So this is a question which covers the amendment. Ganesh has three houses, all of which are self-occupied. The particulars of these houses for the previous year 1920 are as follows. So we have house 1, house 2, and house 3 here, with all the relevant amounts for municipal value: 3 lakhs, 3 lakhs 60, 3 lakh 30. I think I'll rather not read out the figures like this, assuming all of you are looking at the question on the screen. We have the fair rent amount for all the three houses. Standard rent has been given. The date of completion of purchase or construction has also been given to us, which I would like to read out. So for house number 1, the property's construction or purchase was completed on 31st March 1999. For house 2, it was completed on 31st March 2001. And for house 3, it is completed on 1st April 2014. Municipal taxes percentage has been provided to us. Of course, this percentage will be as a percentage of the municipal value. Interest for current year on money borrowed in July 13 for the purpose of purchase of property has been given in respect of house 3, which is 1,75,000. Okay. compute Ganesh's income from house property for AY 2021 and suggest which houses should be opted by Ganesh to be assessed as self-occupied so that his tax liability is minimum. So I have one question coming up here. Abhijit, I'll answer it after the end of this questions that we are trying to cover. Also, people who are attending the lectures, if you have any questions, doubts, you can put them up. Right now, let us focus on this illustration and see how it goes. So here we are required to do some tax planning for Ganesh and compute his tax liability and assign the properties as SOP and DLOP, assuming his tax liability to be nil. तो यूजुअली जब एग्जाम्स में इस तरह के क्वेश्चंस आते हैं तो हमको सबसे पहले तो एक वर्किंग नोट करनी है. This is the way which I would have solved on a board, you know, had we some more infrastructure in place. I'm just sharing that with you. The first working note we would have done here would be assuming all the properties to be self-occupied properties. 3 अलग-अलग computation में यहाँ पर कर लेती. फिर मैं 3 computation करती assuming all the properties to be deemed to be let out properties. And then I would have put up a table wherein I would have plotted all the 3 options. Okay, house 1 is house 1 and house 2 SOP, and house 3 is DLOP. Correct? This way. So let us try and understand how this has been solved here. So we will first look at option 1. These people have done 3 computations here as well. So we will first look at the computation of income from house property. So let us first calculate income from these properties, assuming that the property is DLOP. So here naturally there will be no actual rent received or receivable. So we will be assuming the reasonable expected rent to be my GAV. So income from property, assuming the property to be DLOP, comes up to 2,19,800, 1,76,840 in case of house 2, and 73,640 in case of house 3. For those of you who are leaving the session thinking that just questions are pending, we would be soon covering rates of taxes and amendments to surcharge. So please do attend. I know it is rather tedious to solve a question online like this, but these are some of the relevant illustrations which I feel we should take note of when we are revising this chapter. Okay. So we have the amounts of deemed income computation over here. So Ganesh can opt to treat any of the 2 properties as self-occupied. So first option में Ganesh has treated 1 and 2 as self-occupied and house 3 as deemed to be let out property. So when he does that, his income from house property comes to 43,640. In the second option, Ganesh has treated house 1 and 3 as self-occupied, and the income from the property house 2 will be then be deemed to be let out. Income in that case will be 1,840. House 3 में option 3 में 2 and 3 are treated as self-occupied and 1 is treated as deemed to be let out. And in this case, my income component comes to 19,800. So like we can see, we have to choose that option where my income is the lowest or my loss is the most. So out of that option, the second option here is what I would like to choose. So in this case, I would say that house 1 and 3 are to be treated as self-occupied and house 2 is to be treated as deemed to be let out properties. Okay, so this, I think there is some slight of difficulty when it comes to illustrations, but nonetheless, given whatever limited resources we have in place, at least we can highlight the important illustrations which we need to be updated about. So I would take up one question here from Abhijit. If the information about the reason why the loan is taken is not given, what should be the assumption? So Abhijit, if there is no direct information in the question as to why the loan is being taken, I would request you to probably look at some indirect hints. Maybe somewhere the word construction or purchase might have been used. If not, I would rather say you can assume that the loan is taken for the purpose of purchase or construction and write a suitable note thereunder. Okay, that is your assumption. Also, the period you have to be very specific about. Of course, अभी 99 बहुत पुराना डेट हो गया है, तो 99 के पहले के लोन वाले क्वेश्चंस यूजुअली नहीं दिखाई देंगे, बट अगर उसमें भी आपको कुछ डिफिकल्टी लगती है कि व्हाट पीरियड वी शुड मेंशन, तो आई थिंक उसके लिए भी एक सूटेबल नोट आप लिख सकते हैं दैट वी हैव अज्यूम्ड दैट द लोन इज टेकन ऑन और आफ्टर 1499 फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ परचेज और कंस्ट्रक्शन. So this is the question which we took up, and this is one illustration which I wanted to pick up. The next illustration which I have in mind is for co-owners, which we will quickly look at, and then we'll come to few more interesting things about tips and tricks of how to solve this particular questions in exams. Okay, so coming to page number 4.159, a very quick look we'll have at this illustration, friends. I can understand it's quite a bit tedious to look at the illustrations like this, rather solve them. So coming to page number 4.159, we have a small question on co-owners over here. So two brothers, Arun and Bimal, are co-owners of a house property with equal share. The property was constructed during the year 98-99. The property consists of 8 identical units and it is situated at Cochin. So each owner has occupied 1 unit for residence and the balance 6 units were let out at a rent of 12,000 per month per unit. The municipal value of the house property is 9 lakhs and the municipal taxes are 20% of the value which were paid during the year. Other expenses are as follows: repairs, insurance premium. These two I will ignore on account of the standard deduction in place. Interest payable on loan taken for construction of house. Yes, I will be able to take deduction of that looking at the circumstances. One of the units has remained vacant for 4 months during the year. Arun could not occupy his units for 6 months as he was transferred to Chennai. He does not own any other house. Now, this piece of information is given to us so that we can keep the NAV of his unoccupied property as nil. Supposing Arun was occupying some other house at some other place, then it would have been difficult to do that. The other income of Arun and Bimal are given as follows: 290 and 180. Compute income under the head house property and total income. So just to take you quickly through this illustration, friends, there are about 8 units. One each is occupied by the co-owner for self-occupied purposes. So एक unit का हमको as SOP computation करना है. बाकी सारी 6 units जो हैं उनका हम cumulative computation करेंगे, एक ही computation करेंगे और end में जो भी amount आएगा उसको हम equally divide करेंगे. जैसे सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाइड पोर्शन का कंप्यूटेशन यहाँ पर देख लीजिए, एनएवी नील दोनों का सेपरेट किया है. दोनों का सेपरेट यहाँ पर इसलिए किया है ताकि दोनों इंटरेस्ट का डिडक्शन ले सके एंड देन देयर रिजल्ट्स अ लॉस फ्रॉम हाउस प्रॉपर्टी. जहां तक एलओपी वाले कंपोनेंट का सवाल है, आप देख सकते हैं एक सिंगुलर कैलकुलेशन इन्होंने यहाँ पर किया है फॉर्मेट को ध्यान में रखते हुए. 1 महीने की कुछ वैकेंसी है, एक यूनिट में 4 महीनों की और एक यूनिट के लिए 6 मंथ्स का रेंट मिला हुआ है. वो सारी चीजें यहाँ पर उन्होंने कंसिडर की हुई है. सॉरी, एक यूनिट 6 महीने के लिए अनऑक्यूपाइड रहा है जो मिस्टर अरुण का यूनिट है. So ये सब चीजें factor in करके they have done this computation for let out property and income from the let out portion comes to 2,51,700 which is distributed to each co-owner equally. तो अब अगर आप इनका total income का computation देखेंगे तो यहाँ पर इनकम फ्रॉम लेट आउट पार्ट आ जाता है 125,850. लॉस फ्रॉम सेल्फ ऑक्यूपाइड कंपोनेंट आ जाता है 30,000 और इनका अदर इनकम मिलाकर हम यहाँ पर टोटल इनकम पे वी हैव रीच्ड. So this is how you are going to do the computation in case of questions which are relating to co-owners. If it is a LOP, you do one singular computation and divide the income equally to all the co-owners. If it is a SOP, you do separate computations for each co-owner. At this juncture, there is one question from Beju. He asks, if the assessee has taken loan from his relative for buying of a property, can he still take this interest on loan for tax saving? What about if he has taken loan from AOP? Okay, I'll just answer your question here, Baiju. Even if I have taken a loan for the purpose of buying any property, for the purpose of deduction under section 24, I can take deduction of that interest. But you have used the word tax saving in your question, so that takes me to ATC as well. So friends, जब हम बैंक वगैरह से लोन लेते हैं, जब हम EMI पे करते हैं, तो जो प्रिंसिपल कंपोनेंट होता है उस लोन का, उसका हम ATC में डिडक्शन लेते हैं फ्रॉम ग्रॉस टोटल इनकम. अगर हमने किसी रिलेटिव वगैरह से या किसी AOP से या किसी अदर देन फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन से लोन लिया हुआ है, तो वो वाले लोन का इंटरेस्ट का डिडक्शन हम ले पाएंगे, पर principal component का हम APC के under deduction नहीं ले सकते. I hope that solves the doubt. Okay. So this was about the illustration on co-owners. I would just like to share 2-3 important things here about computation of income from house property. So अक्सर ये सवाल आता है कि what would be the scenario if my property is located outside India? Is the rental income still chargeable to tax? Yes. So the answer here is predominantly if the assessee you're doing the computation for is a resident and ordinarily resident assessee, तो जिसका global income taxable होता है, तो उस केस में ये पर्सन जो है जो फॉरेन कंट्री में भी प्रॉपर्टी ओन कर रहा है, उसका रेंटल इनकम भी उसके हाथ में इंडिया में टैक्स होना है. अब कैसे इस चीज को टैक्स करना है, तो ऑब्वियसली जैसे आपको इंडियन प्रॉपर्टी के लिए डिटेल्स दिया जाता है, वैसे आपको क्वेश्चन में डिटेल्स दिया जाएगा फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ कंप्यूटिंग income for that foreign property. For example, whatever is the equivalent of annual value, municipal taxes, any amount of interest paid on borrowings, all these parameters will be suitably given to you if at all in the question you are given a property which is located in a foreign country. So based upon the residential status of my assessee, I will be including income from that property which is located in a foreign country in my computation. So this is one aspect which usually people ask. Secondly, composite rent se related, what kind of questions we can expect. So typically, see, if there is a question wherein you have some property along with some assets which are given on hire, that question could usually be a part and parcel of your income from other sources perspective, because the asset part of rent always goes in E4s. If at all a question comes up over here, you now know the logic that if at all bifurcation is available, you have to consider only rent pertaining to income from house property under this particular head, and all the other rents that you have derived will be gone under the head income from other sources or PGB. Okay. So I'll just look at the last illustration which I'm wanting to cover here, which is question number 3 on page number 4.156, which is based on pre-construction period. So we'll go to 4.156. We'll just quickly go through the question. As I'm taking this lecture, because none of us are used to attending and taking lectures like this, what I feel is we can also try and incorporate some MCQs as a part of this. Now, what can be done is I have some sample MCQs typed out at my end. Possibly I can send it to the coordinators who can get it emailed to you. And maybe, as small breaks in the course of our lectures, we can try and discuss few MCQs. So that would make all of you more attentive and it would sort of cut the monotony. At the end of this session, I'll just discuss it with Ravish and Rishikesh. All right. Okay. Taking it further, question number 3, page number 4.156. Mr. Vikas owns a house property whose municipal value, fair rent and standard rent are 96,000, 1,26,000, 1,88,000 respectively. During the financial year 1920, 1/3 of the portion of the house was let out for residential purposes at a monthly rent of 5,000. The remaining 2/3 was self-occupied. So along with pre-construction interest, this question also has the concept of partly let out properties. Municipal tax is paid at the rate of 11% of the municipal value. The construction of the house began in June 2012 and was completed on 31st May 2015. So our pre-construction period here is from June 2012 up to 31st March 2015, because 15-16 is the previous year in which my property was constructed. Vikas took a loan of 1 lakh on 1st July 2012 for the construction of his building. He has paid interest at the rate of 12% per annum every month, and such interest was paid. Okay. So I think we will quickly go to the working note, which is related to the pre-construction interest calculation, because that is the most important part here. Now, interest for the year, which is my current year's interest, is 12% of 1 lakh of the principal amount outstanding, which comes to 12,000. Now, pre-construction period here is to be calculated from June 2012 up to March 2015. Okay, so that comprises 33 months from 1st July 2012 से लेकर 31st March 2015 तक 33 months का interest है 12% per annum से 1 लाख रुपए के लिए for 33 months comes to 33,000. Now this pre-construction interest of 33,000 is to be allowed equally over a period of 5 years beginning from financial year 15-16. So 15-16 से लेकर 19-20 ये जो 5 consecutive years हैं इनमें ये interest आपका allow होना है 6,600 rupees every year. Now 6,600 plus 12,000 what we have here is the amount which will have to be which should not exceed the threshold in case of self-occupied properties. अब इस वाले illustration में part of the property let out है and part of the property is a self-occupied property. So for the let out component, the interest on loan that is there 18,600, 1/3 component is let out. So entire 1/3 component will be deductible here. 2/3 components will be deductible when I'm computing income from self-occupied property, which is 12,400. Now, assuming this 2/3 component was more than 2 lakhs, then we would have restricted it to 2 lakhs as far as my computation of self-occupied property was concerned. So friends, this is at best what I can do when it comes to solving questions. I can probably put up relevant questions from the institute study material right before us and only hope that you are following what is being discussed. As far as the explanation part goes, I'm sure, I hope rather, most of you would have followed what I have put up on the slides. Most of the questions I have tackled till now. What I also see is a lot of people have dropped the video, when the questions part come up. Friends, please don't do that because like I said, during the entire course of lecture, a lot of live things we would be covering and it is also necessary to get a good hand on questions as well. Now, I think I can quickly run through the rates of tax for this assessment here, which is also a part of amendments. And then I think we can take up few questions if at all, right? Just give me 2 minutes till I share the relevant screen. Okay, friends. So the last limb of the lecture will quickly cover some aspects about rates of tax. So, we have touched upon this as well. Like I said, even though I'm revising a particular head of income in a lecture, there'll be a lot of concepts which might help you in MCQs. There might be some random amendments which I would wish to cover. So please ensure that you all are attentive all throughout. That's the best I can do to ensure that. Okay, coming to the rates of tax. Now, these are the rates of tax for individuals other than senior citizens and very senior citizens and HUFs, AOPs and BOIs. The basic exemption limit is 2,50,000. From 2,50,000 to 5 lakhs, the rate of tax is 5%. From 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs, the rate of tax is 20%. Above 10 lakhs, the rate of tax is 30%. For individuals who are senior citizens, friends. So those individuals who are 60 years or more during the previous year, and very importantly, they are also residents under the Income Tax Act, would come within the meaning of the term residents. Senior citizens, sorry. So 60 or more and residents in the previous year. The slab rates for these category of individuals is their basic exemption limit is 3 lakhs. Up to 3 lakhs, there is no rate of tax. From 3 lakhs to 5 lakhs, the tax rate is 5%. From 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs, it is 20%. For income which is over and above 10 lakh rupees, the rate of tax is 30%. For very senior citizens, that is a category of individuals who are residents and are 80 or more years of age during the previous year. Up to 5 lakh rupees, there is no tax rate. From 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs, the rate of tax is 20%. For an income which is more than 10 lakh rupees, the rate of tax is 30%. For cooperative societies, if you have income up to 10,000 or less than 10,000, the rate of tax is 10%. For the bracket 10,000 to 20,000, it is 20%. For 20,000 and above, it is 30%. It is interesting to note here that cooperative societies don't have any basic exemption limit. Even if they earn 1,000, 2,000 rupees, they are liable to pay 10% of taxes. So this is very important, friends. Here, I would just request all of you to pay attention. Though it is a table, it is more of a memory game than a concept game, but we need to be updated about that as well. So these are the Finance Act 2019 made tremendous changes to surcharge. So there were like in 3 lots these changes came, and for us as tax professionals, it was really a task to keep up with the changes. And for you as students, it is going to be a task to keep up with the updates that are coming in. So these are some surcharge rates which I have tabulated. So the rate surcharge is calculated as a percentage of income tax. We have 2 categories here. My total income is more than 1 crore but less than 10 crores, and my total income is more than 10 crores. So for a firm, the rate of surcharge for total income for the first category, that is more than 1 crore, less than 10 crore, is 12%. So as it is for a cooperative society and for a local authority. For a domestic company whose total income is more than 1 crore but less than 10 crores, the surcharge rate is 7%. For a foreign company whose total income is more than 1 crore and less than 10 crore, the surcharge rate is 2%. For assessees whose total income is more than 10 crores, be it a firm, a cooperative society, a local authority, or a domestic company, the rate of surcharge is 12%. For a foreign company having total income more than 10 crores, the rate of surcharge is 5%. Going further, surcharge as a rate of income tax. Now, this is in case of individuals, HUFs, AOPs, BOIs, and artificial juridical persons. There are 4 slabs of surcharge, mind you. Please pay attention. The last 2 have come out just in October. So for total income, which is more than 50 lakhs and less than 1 crore, the surcharge rate is 12%. For total income, which is more than 1 crore but less than 2 crores, the surcharge rate is 15% for individuals, HUFs, AOPs, BOIs, and artificial juridical persons. For these set of assessees whose total income is more than 2 crores and less than 5 crores, the surcharge rate is 25%. And for these assessees whose total income is more than 5 crores, the rate of surcharge is 37%. इनको हम super rich बोलते हैं. Because of this highest rate of surcharge being 37%, the maximum marginal rate computed under the Income Tax Act has shot up to as good as 47% approximately. So I think, friends, surcharge was what I would like to cover here. And these are tax rates for companies and some basic concepts of income tax which are there, plus surcharge in some special cases. But I would like to cover it at maybe tomorrow's lecture somewhere in middle, just to cut the monotony of the topic that is going on. Apart from this, I would, just like to share something with you. You can probably try and practice this one question of exercise that I had just put up, which is question number, just give me a minute. Question number 11 on page number, question number 11 on page number 4.168 of the exercise part is what you can put up. I'll just put on the rate of tax slide on again. So part of rates of taxes and surcharge we have covered today. These being typically dry things, we would be covering it in installments during the course of our lectures in interim. So yes. Okay. So I think we have revised IFHP in detail. We have taken care of the amendments. We have seen all the rates of taxes and all in detail. Now tomorrow, friends, I would like to pick up PGBP because it is a very important head of income, and I think it would take us more than one session to really do justice to it. However, we would be combining PGBP with few smaller things like this. Otherwise, it would become too monotonous and heavy for all of us. Also, you can let know your feedback, especially with regards to how the questions are going to me on this chat, or to your Vikasa coordinators who are doing this diligent work of handling the event, because it's really a bit difficult to put forth questions before you, but we do have to look at some questions. Only then we get a profound understanding of the concept which is covered. So I think for the day, we will end it at this, with revision of IFHP in detail, amendments, and rates of tax a part of that. Tomorrow we will be meeting with PGBP. I would like to divide the PGBP session on 2 days. So first major portion of the lecture we would be covering PGBP, and then we would be revising smaller concepts that are there. I hope all of you found this session to be useful. Or okay, there's one query here. Ma'am, individual surcharge for 50 lakhs and 1 crore is 10%. You have said 12%. Okay, Ronak, I will just clarify that. Please hold on. Okay. I think Ravish, if you have any queries which have come up on your portal, you can take them up.
Prachi, there's no question on this particular topic.
Okay.
I've been also searching for if somebody has any type of question, but there's no question. Your deliberation was so good that I think इसके दो कारण है, either सबको बहुत कुछ समझ में आया जैसे मुझे समझ में आया, या किसी को कुछ नहीं समझ में आया. But I am sure कि second option वो applicable ही नहीं है. It is not applicable. तो सबको समझ में आया. और ये थोड़ा सा मुझे लगता है ना, ये एक अच्छा टॉपिक है, बच्चों का फेवरेट टॉपिक है क्योंकि इट्स इजी. कल के टॉपिक में आई थिंक सबसे ज्यादा क्वेरीज होने वाली हैं.
हाँ, पीजीबीपी जो है थोड़ा लेंदी है, तो मैंने उसको 2 लॉजिकल हाफ्स में डिवाइड किया है. तो वो ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ 2 डेज हम कवर करेंगे, तो कैसे अच्छे से डाइजेस्ट हो जाएगा सारे बच्चों को, एंड इट विल आल्सो बी इजियर.
राइट.
उसके साथ थोड़ा लाइटर टॉपिक्स कंबाइन करेंगे, तो इट शुड नॉट बी अ.
प्राची, इफ यू कैन कनेक्ट हाउस प्रॉपर्टी विद क्लबिंग ऑफ इनकम, just clubbing of income,
section 27 and section 64 का जो थोड़ा सा पार्ट है. यस, ट्रू.
उससे कॉन्सेप्ट एग्जाम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से नहीं, बट कॉन्सेप्चुअल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से थोड़ा सा.
करेक्ट. सो अभी जब पीजीबीपी कवर अप करने वाले हैं, तो उसके साथ जो लाइटर टॉपिक्स में इंटेंड करना चाहती हूँ कवर करूँ, तो मेरा ऐसा है कि क्लबिंग एंड सेट ऑफ को हम कवर कर ले, ताकि वो दोनों को हम मैच कर सकते हैं.
राइट.
ओके. अच्छा, इसमें भी ये जो रेट्स ऑफ टैक्स एंड जो सब फॉर द पीपल हु आर स्टिल लिसनिंग, So this tax rates for companies and all, there have been a whole lot of changes here. But like I did today, the last 10-15 minutes we would be taking this up ताकि ये इसको as a whole में उठाऊंगी तो एक virtual class में ये बहुत ज़्यादा dry और uninteresting सा हो जाएगा. तो इसको हम रोज थोड़ा थोड़ा installments में cover करेंगे, right? Okay, so I think अभी हम इसको कैसे मतलब we will just end the meeting, right? आप host हो इसके साथ
हाँ जी जी जी
So I think
Prachi, it was a wonderful session, I must say, and I was sitting on this chair for past 2.5 years, past 2 years, 2 hours.
I hope आपके punishment ना हो गए.
नहीं, it was worth. और क्योंकि हम लखनऊ से हैं तो कुछ शेरो शायरी हम लोग लिखते जरूर हैं, तो आपके लिए हमने कुछ लिखा है अभी बैठ के.
श्योर इरशाद.
हाँ, किस तरह शुक्रिया करें खुदा का, अल्फाज नहीं मिलते. किस तरह शुक्रिया अदा करें, अल्फाज नहीं मिलते. डायरेक्ट टैक्स इतना आसान ना होता अगर प्राची जैसे शिक्षक ना मिलते.
Thank you so much.
So with these words I will say thank you so much for your precious time. लॉकडाउन में सुबह उठ के बच्चों के सामने आना, उनको पढ़ाना, it's a wonderful job. And
yes.
Thank you so much on behalf.
Just one thing, ये activity करने से काफी positivity मुझे feel होती है, तो मेरा दिन productive हो जाता है, and I hope I am successful in passing on that productivity to all our students. So everyone who is listening to us, please use your day carefully. Don't get bored. It's a new way of looking at things. Make the most of the time. थोड़ा enjoy कीजिए, थोड़ा पढ़ाई कीजिए, and remain happy, positive, stay at home and stay safe. And I hope to see most of you tomorrow with PGBP.
Okay, bye-bye. Take care.
Yes, bye. Thank you. Take care. Yes.